Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's event, How to Optimize M365 for Information Professionals. I'm Teresa Resick, Vice President here at AIIM, and AIIM is your host, and we're the producer of today's event. Just want to thank all of the sponsors and contributors who are joining us today. And those sponsors are ActiveNav, Arctis, Cadence Solutions, and Proventech. And we have additional contributions from TUMI Transformations and Microsoft. And we certainly thank them for their participation, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. And as we get started, I just want to share a few pointers to help you participate in all that we're doing today. Open up the chat feature, use this throughout the day, chat with each other, chat with us, ask for questions. But this is also where Jessica and I are going to be dropping some links in there, most importantly for resources, the things that are the cool reading that our sponsors and contributors are sharing, the agenda document so you can know what speaker's coming next. And there's just a whole lot more that we're going to keep dropping in there, but do check out those resources. Do ask questions of our presenters as we go along, and use either the Q&A feature or the chat. We'll be here monitoring them, and we'll get to as many of those questions with each presenter as we can. If you do need to step out, I would greatly appreciate it if you take the feedback survey. I always value what you have to say, and let us know how we're doing. And again, look to the chat for that link, and I'll post it throughout the day so that you'll have that at your fingertips whenever you need. We are recording things, and after the event is over with, we will send a link to everybody so you can come back and catch a replay. So you can, re-listen to things, invite your colleagues to listen to it. Just want to have as many ways for you to enjoy all that we have to share with you today. And joining us as our host and MC, and I will preface this right now, hoping his internet connection stays stable throughout the day. Gremlins are messing with us a little bit. But leading us off here today is Kevin Crane. And Kevin is the host and producer of the AIM on Air podcast series. And that podcast was recently listed on Forrester's 100 Best Channel Podcasts of 2021. Kevin is also the author of many of AIM's books and tip sheets and infographics. I'm sure you've seen him around. And I have the pleasure of working with Kevin on so many different projects, and so glad he's back with us today. Hi, Kevin.
Hi, Teresa. Thank you so much. And hi, everybody. Happy New Year. Welcome back to yet another great AIM virtual event, this time to talk about how to optimize Microsoft 365 for information professionals. And it's a really important topic at a really important time, because Microsoft 365 is becoming ubiquitous. The platform has currently about 200 million active users. Teams alone has about 115 million daily active users. Those are millions. Usage of Teams jumped by 50% just last year alone. About 1 out of 5 corporate employees use a Microsoft 365 cloud service. And according to a survey conducted by AIM recently, 93% of AIM member organizations are using Microsoft 365 in some fashion. So Microsoft 365 is everywhere. Adoption has skyrocketed. But the questions are, how can we fully leverage Microsoft 365 and make the most of the platform? What can we do to fight the continuing battle of information overload? And is the platform enough for all of our information governance needs? Nearly 63% of AIM members tell us that they see a continuing role for third-party solutions in maximizing their impact and investment with Microsoft 365, especially in areas like governance and records management, but also things like integration with back-end processes and other key industry-specific processes. But most of all, AIM members tell us that information chaos is the top records management challenge within Microsoft 365. People fear that records are everywhere and that information volume and variety is expanding too quickly to keep up. So when it comes to establishing governance around This growing volume of information, organizations face some fundamental choices. Should I try to do governance and records management for Microsoft 365 content within Microsoft 365? Should I treat Microsoft 365 as a collaborative space and move records, all of my records into a dedicated repository? Or should I be migrating content from other repositories into 365? And when it comes to optimizing the native abilities of Microsoft 365, organizations are wondering how to push the out-of-box capabilities of Microsoft 365 as far as possible, and how to build strategies for pulling other content repositories under the governance umbrella and when to do it, and how to recognize when additional applications are needed to make the most of the Microsoft 365 experience. And of course, with 365 becoming a standard, everyone's wondering how the platform will likely evolve in the future and what that will mean for our future plans and strategies. So that's what we'll be exploring in today's webinar. Get your yellow legal pad and your number 2 pencil out, because it will be an informative one, and be ready to take notes. So let's get to the program today, starting with our keynote presenter, Peggy Winton. Peggy, are you with us?
I am here,
Hello,
Kevin.
Peggy. There you are. It's so good to see
Hi.
you. Happy New Year. Now, everyone, of course, Peggy is no stranger to most of us. As AIIM's Chief Executive Officer, Peggy is responsible for the strategic, technical, and customer growth direction at AIIM. And Peggy is a leading voice in intelligent information management. And I'm so pleased to have her here with us today to review some of AIIM's most recent research and to get her thoughts on controlled content services in Microsoft 365. Peggy, welcome aboard, and please tell us more.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I will have to correct you with my AIM hat on. Don't use a legal pad and pencils. Start your notes in digital form, please.
All right.
No more
All right.
paper, no
Very
more paper.
well.
But Kevin, thank you. You really hit some of the highlights that I want to dig into a little bit more. And I'm going to repeat that first stat that you shared, that 93% of the organizations recently surveyed by AIM are using M365 in some fashion. And something tells me that you in the audience are among that very, very high percentage of users in some ways. And Kevin absolutely hit the nail on the head in that Microsoft has been enjoying broad market share as a major leader in worker productivity, productivity tool well before the year 2020. But we all know that the exploding work from home trend begun because of COVID's effects have really caused the rapid revolution of Microsoft Teams in particular as a pretty widely used front end to collaboration and information sharing and knowledge management. There's that term that's come back in style, and rightly so. And it's those usage have really allowed that uptake, that adoption number to increase across the M365 platform. That's in more users, but also in broader utilization among existing users. They're really, really pushing the envelope and using it more. So while this massive growth enables thousands of organizations like yours to maintain that much needed connectivity and productivity, it obviously is going to present some new levels of complexity. And that's where we want to focus our efforts today. This is probably a good time for me to explain why AIM, a product neutral community advocacy and education community is focusing a webinar on, well, a specific product. Firstly, the challenges that we're going to discuss today are certainly not unique to Microsoft. Any adoption at this kind of pace and scale would have similar challenges. So no dings on the technology, but neither are we shills for Microsoft. It is one of lots of potential tools for information management activities. But as Kevin said, the reason why we are focusing our discussions today is really twofold. It's the pace of development of new capabilities that are so important and are creating both opportunities and a lot of excitement, but also some lingering questions. And it's also the rate of adoption. SharePoint Syntex is a really good example of some recent and very, very quick development. This is Microsoft's content management solution that actually employs artificial intelligence to turn all those unstructured files we deal with all the time into organized information so that it can be read by machines and have algorithms applied to it for some really heavy lifting and processing. But this in particular helps our users find, protect, and automate business practices. And after its launch last year, new capabilities like very precise document modeling and analytics and compliance have already been added. So again, pretty impressive pace of development. On the adoption side, it's largely because of these new developments and just better usability that so many of the organizations that we polled consider M365 to now be their primary content management solution. Imagine, and this is where I'm going to have you think about that. How many do you think among the AIM community consider M365 as their primary content management system? I should have created a poll out of this. I won't belabor the suspense. It's a full 50%. That's pretty amazing. And as such, the desired functionality and the challenges that are going to come along with that of any content services platform at this scale, they're also present with M365, adoption and optimization. So let's look closer at some of the results of the extensive research and conversations that we always have among the AIM Microsoft user community. And let's share some of these findings around the key implementation and optimization trends. Okay. The first is that in order to really take advantage of new M365 content management capabilities, organizations are really feeling the pressure to migrate content from on-premise SharePoint in particular to and other sources into M365 in the cloud. And really, isn't it about time? It's also pretty imperative when such a large number of our workers are no longer connected to the mothership. So look at all those on-premises sources for organizational content. Note the dreaded network drives. And this is probably a conversation and a comment and continuing thoughts about content migration in general, regardless of where you're moving it to. Looking at where it's coming from probably reveals some of the gaps that you have in modernization and in access. And haven't we seen movement to the cloud just grow by leaps and bounds in a pretty short time? We used to say it's not a question of if, but when. And now that certainly is the case. It too is almost becoming ubiquitous. So while so many of you have now made the move to the cloud and you intend to continue that push to the cloud in just the next, few months, you still say that the mere migration of unstructured and semi-structured information is a challenge to you. And we should probably dig into that. Why is it such a challenge? Is it just some of the typical angst around what to take and just getting to it to begin with, kind of like cleaning out your closet sort of thing? What are the challenges that still remain for your organization when 58 of you say that it is? And I don't think it's a matter of technology, really, or what a lot of people put up a flag just about cloud in general is just security or access fears. Certainly, you have to be mindful of the sensitivity of information, but whether you're migrating teams from one Office 365 tenant to another, or you're getting content out of your file shares, or maybe even Box or Dropbox or Google Drive, the objective is that you want to preserve the values that you've worked so hard to develop and maintain. You want your managed metadata and your approval policies in place. You don't want to leave critical files behind, nor do you want to take what would be considered rot. And we know that stands for redundant, obsolete, and trivial information. So it really becomes critical to understand the data landscape that you've got and identify the most important data across what might be a hybrid environment. And most organizations are hybrid right now. At this point, just getting the M365 architecture right becomes a pretty strategic priority. And that's where we'll get into where some outside help might really be needed. We'll also talk about getting the architecture right can enable the tools that are available out of the box. And keep that point in mind, because we're going to revisit that in just a minute. But given the advancements and innovation on the technology side, I really think this becomes less of a technology challenge and more of a business strategy and information management challenge. And isn't that really always the case? It's not necessarily the technology that causes so much problem. So it's clear that a lot of new content is being created, both collaborative content applications and transactional content services. A lot of that is now M365 content. And document-centric collaboration is one of the main uses and an area where you've told us you need some best practices. That's right. We are our documents, but automating how work moves through any organization to support your key business processes, and I would add particularly those for growing, demanding customer base. That's an area of concern for so many of you, and that's where a lot of your challenges lie. Ideally, any of you who are M365 administrators, you want to be able to apply protection actions, but you want them to be flexible. They've got to be flexible. And that includes things like encryption and access restrictions and visual markings. So look at all these areas and you'll see they're all important, but that accessibility with permissioning is so important. And Kevin mentioned that content governance really does continue to be an area of concern. I think it's manifesting itself in a feeling that there is a lack of governance and the security that aligns with that. As a result, a lot of you are considering whether the newer M365 governance, records, and security capabilities, if you plan for them properly and optimize them, are they finally sufficient enough to natively handle at least that part of the information chaos challenge? But many of you at large scale find it hard to understand the new governance capabilities, how to deploy them correctly, really, and how to put guardrails around the explosion of content that is want to take place when there's such a rush of new users, as we experienced over the last 20 months or so. And it's really all about getting users to do what they don't really like to do. They typically resist, and that is managing their content in a controlled environment. And I know we don't always like using the word controlled, and that's where our message keeps coming back, is to really meet users where they live and where they work. And flexibility is another really operative word. So when we take a little bit of a deeper dive in this idea of governance and probe, you tell us that protecting data and information effectively to just really minimize threats. And it's not just threats from members of your supply chain or partners. It's just threats from use within your organization of folks that shouldn't be there or don't know how to treat some of these assets with the care and safety that they deserve. That's by far now the top driver, even over just compliance concerns. So I think that's really, really interesting. Certainly many of you are highly regulated industries, but you're more worried about the access controls than you are just enforcing your compliance policies. And I think this points to the growth in not only the number of collaborators across your organization, but also outside of your organization. So just like with other applications and processes, ultimately your users really want to be able to automatically retain, delete, and store data and records in a compliant manner. And again, that's not unique to Microsoft. It would be a desire in any other information management system. AIIM has talked about this long and hard through the years, that automation is the only way to manage this at scale. And that's certainly the case when it comes to Teams, Microsoft Teams in particular, and M365 in general. And you can see here a pretty high demand for retention, disposition, automation, and user management activities like permissioning. This is where we can depict that, and you see across the board there. But that disposition for Teams conversations is certainly high on the list there. As Kevin mentioned, our users have always felt like the out-of-the-box solutions were capabilities were not enough, and we have a thriving community of M365 partners, not only channel partners, but third-party add-ons to really enhance the capabilities out of the box. And We've done so much with that community through the years, and it's just exciting to see how they've changed and grown and have acquired a lot of capabilities to extend deep industry and horizontal process functionality and real subject matter expertise there. And we have several of those partners with us today. So help is at hand. But it is in this area of governance that there is a recognition and a need for some real experts. And even for organizations that are considering M365 as their main content solution, and they're wanting to leverage those capabilities, there's still some functional areas in which the requirements are pretty complex, and augmenting M365 native capabilities with third-party solutions continues to make sense for them. And this is reflected in that 42% that find additional governance and records management solutions most useful. Transactional content processes are, I think, what are driving that 38% that seek third-party solutions to help integrate M365 into core line of business processes. Kevin mentioned that at the very beginning, and we can't emphasize that enough. Again, not unique to M365, getting content and information into your key business processes is a high priority, regardless of solution and organization. 34% seek those same capabilities, but for their own industry specific solutions, like a manufacturing or their ERP systems. So this is the most interesting thing. We've talked about the governance and line of business process integration, but our advice, my parting advice is you've got to meet users where they live. And despite the massive growth and adoption, there's still such a good amount of education and change management efforts that are needed to fully explain and leverage the quickly developing M365 capabilities. There's a lot of lingering confusion about when updates might be coming down the line. But as with other enterprise tools, organizations should really make a commitment to leverage those tools, to teach folks how to do that and devote enough time to that. The idea is to optimize as much as possible so that you avoid any kind of customization that's required. And I'm so excited to tell you that in the sessions that you're going to hear later today, that's exactly what we're going to be focusing on. I want to particularly call out Mimi Dion and Gordon Brown. They are so kind to share their philosophy. They are going to be developing a series of courses as part of the AIIM Plus Pro, huge portfolio that is really, really exciting for us. And they came to me and said, you know, there are plenty of complaints about shortfalls and gaps, et cetera, but we really want to focus on the tools themselves and stop complaining. A lot of the tools are there. It's just how to do it. So build strategies to push the out of the box capabilities. It is in the tools, the secret's in the tools, and you'd be amazed. And again, that's not a unique situation with M365. How many systems do we have where it's a big black hole or a big whiteboard and we're only touching the surface of what is capable? So we've got some experts here, And I'm really excited to see what they have to say. So Kevin, it's back to you, and let's buckle up and get some answers to these challenges and questions. So thanks, everyone.
Well, thank you, Peggy. That's fantastic. Some really great perspective always from AIM research, real world practitioners that we're talking to. Now, Peggy, before you go real quick, what are folks saying about cloud services and security concerns? Is that still a prevalent concern among AIM members?
It's lessening, I think, just because capabilities are improving all the time. And I did make that point. I think that's always been maybe an excuse for organizations to avoid making that migration. It really comes down to the context itself. And that's where the hard work is. You know, a lot of people don't want to make that decision. Who does?
Right.
You know, whose job is it anyway? So that is not the number one concern anymore. I think it really is down to this, you know, auditing, knowing what you have, and knowing that you're taking the right things.
Very good. All right. Thank you, Peggy. That is Peggy Winton.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peggy. All right. Well, Teresa, I know that we have, before we move on to our next presenter today, we have a poll that we'd like to run. Teresa, do we have that available?
That we do. And let me go ahead and launch this out to everyone. It's more of just taking a pulse after we've heard this, you know, really insightful keynote from Peggy. Kevin and I wanted to ask this question out to you. If a song could describe how you feel about your or your organization's level of confidence in governing information in M365, what would that be? Is it We Are the Champions by Queen? Is it Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, rising up to the challenges? Under Pressure by Queen and David Bowie. You know a little bit, but it's a little bit stressful there. Or Help by the Beatles. Would you please help me? So let us know your thoughts here. What's your confidence of how your organization is governing information in M365? And so let's go ahead and take a look at these results here.
Let's see what we have, Teresa.
So let me stop the poll, share the results out, and this is what we're seeing. 53% are saying that you're under pressure.
Well, I think we certainly understand that, and maybe needing a little bit of help as well.
Yeah, and I also think that that's why we're here today, to get some, you know, ideas and insights and some, dare I say, something as simple as tips on how to do this. But there's a lot of really good insight coming our way here today. So
Yes.
thank you for taking this poll. We're going to have another one a little bit later on in our time today. But Kevin, let me go ahead and turn it back to you so that we continue
All right.
to hear about all of this.
All right, very good. Well, let's move ahead with our presenters this morning. Up next is Jordan Uderhagen. Jordan, are you with us?
I am, Kevin. How are you?
Hello, Jordan. Welcome aboard. Well, let me give you a nice formal introduction and we'll get going. Joining us today is Jordan Uderhagen, Managing Director at Cadence Solutions, here to give us a bit of a perspective on records management in Microsoft 365. We're going to learn about how sensitivity labels, case closure of records, and e-discovery capabilities are available right out of the box within Microsoft 365. Jordan, please tell us more.
Yeah, let me just share my screen here, Kevin, and give me a thumbs up when that works, and I'll dive into it.
Looking good, Jordan.
Excellent. So I'll do 2 slides only about me and what I do for a living and why I think this will be impactful for you. And then we're going to get into a demonstration. I've attended a lot of conferences and events where I'm more of a technical guy. I want to see things work, and seeing is believing to be in software. So I'm going to reverberate that today in the session. So a bit about myself, and it's a kind of a unique story. I started on the customer side of the table. You know, the poll result there, under pressure, absolutely, where I worked at an organization as an IT employee. We hired a large company to come in, what I call a big logo organization. I won't name them, but you know who they are. They're usually doing accounting audits and such, to deliver a records management project. And it was a complete debacle. So we spent about $300,000 in 3 months, essentially had nothing to move forward with. This involved the migration of some legacy systems. This involved formal records management and retention schedules to be built out in an ECM system. And really the result was we paid for a lot of flights and beer for consultants to show up and not do a lot. So I founded a company after leaving that organization and started kind of doing the implementations a little bit differently, dare I say ethically. And we've been doing that for 8 years now, completed over 75 projects in municipal, public, and private industries across North America. So that kind of stems into my team. So we have a large team here. We're growing each year. We're actually doubled in size last year. So things are booming, specifically in the 365 world as well, as a lot of you are starting to roll things out. We help companies struggling with digital transformation. We can be that caveat and the ability to deliver, most importantly, not just sit there and eat up budgets like some other organizations do. So that's the focus from the organization I work with and founded at Cadence. We're a partner with Microsoft, OpenText, and SAP, so the 3 big guys in the industry there. Today's exclusively, of course, on Microsoft 365. So in terms of demo scenarios, what I want to go through, and we've given a few webinars in the past and talked a bit with AIIM on what we should present here today. And we get a lot of the repeat questions, and Peggy touched on them earlier. So it was, how do we engage users from a very basic non-records standpoint to save content into the system? So we just want users to essentially know where to put their things, get prompted for metadata, have that all governed, and you know, the triggers and everything fire behind the scenes for sensitivity labels without needing to bother them. They really just want somewhere to put their things. That's what I struggled with at an organization. That one that I mentioned earlier is we had 1,000 users. We had a lot that weren't great with technology. We had some straight up retire. They didn't want to go through another system change. So we want to meet them, to Peggy's point, meet them in the tools and make their life as easy as possible. That just starts the whole change management win. So today I'm going to show off a bit of the file plan in 365 in the Compliance Center. I'm going to show it from a user perspective as well as we go through the case closure of records. So third-party add-ons used to be a really, really big thing with SharePoint, of course, when SharePoint was on premise and it was harder to manipulate and you needed to buy those subscription-based products to perform physical records management or advanced electronic records management dispositioning. I'm going to show you how we can do a lot of that out of the box with 365, and to not be intimidated or afraid by some of that functionality that does exist there. You do have to uncover it a little bit, but that's something we can help with. So I'll go through some case closure of records. We'll do a document set, close that out, and see the retention applied automatically to it. I'm going to go through sensitivity labels, which to me, when I first saw it, was one of those jaw-dropping moments. So if we have a social security number for my Canadian friends, a social insurance number, in a document, we want that locked down, not shareable, not able to leave the organization or the cloud environment, of course, where it's hosted. So I'm going to show that off. That's a major, major feature. The pattern recognition is really, really powerful without needing, again, to procure any additional software. You have this at your fingertips. That drops into data loss prevention as well. So if it is PII from a sensitive piece of content or a pattern inside of the content, and we do want to stop sharing and restrict additional access when that PII is there. And then, of course, legal holds. So legal holds, we're going to give an entire presentation on this at one point, but because of the 365 ecosystem, the ability to have that hold very wide across the organization is available to you now. In traditional ECM systems, you have to put everything in the ECM system. If you end up buying a federated search piece, yes, you can go and grab things from the file share and grab things from, you know, maybe your case system, your record system, your email system, and it's just kind of crawling into things, and you have all this, you know, hooks into different systems to try to get the information back to go through a legal hold and any discovery. So because of 365 and its ability to go into mailboxes, OneDrive, SharePoint, name a custodian, there's a lot of capabilities there, again, without needing to procure other software. So that's what I'm going to go through. I'll jump out of the PowerPoint here. I'll jump into the screen share on the actual application. If that's still working right, I'll carry on. If not, Kevin, just jump in. So first thing I'm going to show off here is the ability in one of my previous lives is contract management rollout. So it's a go-to area for me. We have a SharePoint site. We have some contract management document library inside of it. We have different vendors in our organization that we do business with. And we're going to roll out a new contract for Wonka Industries. So all of our contracts with Wonka are stored in this area. They're stored as a document set. Underneath that document set, we're putting in all the documentation. Those could be amendments, negotiations, correspondence, change requests, anything that pertains to a contract will be stored in one of these document sets. You can see all these are closed right now, and they all have a retention label in that column, about 5 columns in, which is defined as CAD 100 statement of work. As we set up a new document set for a contract workspace, we're going to pick a few pieces of information. Of course, we can automate all this, but I'm not going to cheat in a demonstration or a presentation here. Different content types, start dates and end dates. So we can actually do the retention, of course, based off of the contract end date. If there's a termination date, we want to calculate based on that and not the create date of any content or the create date of the set. We can add in our own signatory information. And of course, you want to send that out to DocuSign, that's all possible as well. So I'm going to save this set. In here now, we just have our workspace. So we have a document set, we have some metadata across the side in the information pane, and we have our contract status as drafting. I'm going to upload a few documents here. Let's say we're moving forward in time, we've negotiated, we've redlined, we've executed the contract, we've performed, or the vendors performed the deliverables for us, and we're ready to close this out. So if you've seen me demo before, I can demo for hours on end, so I'm going to hustle through some of this. As we go through to close out this contract, you're going to notice that right now there's no compliance asset ID. That's one of the ways 365 actually goes and performs its records retention disposition, and there's no retention label. But again, to Peggy's point earlier, we don't want users to sit here and have to pick a retention schedule. That's the worst case for us. We want them to just simply go in there and say, this contract is closed, this project is completed. So as they go through and click closed, on the contract status on the right side here, it's actually going to go through and in about a minute or so, it's going to flag it with a retention label. It's going to pull a compliance asset ID, and it's going to set this all up for the compliance center to take over on the dispositioning side of things. So I'll give this a minute. We'll try to do it like the baking shows where it's pre-cooked and ready to go. I may just jump back to this so we're not sitting here staring at a system. So I'll jump off into the sensitivity label side of things. Just one more refresh. There we go. So you can see down here, bottom right of the screen, it's automatically applied a compliance asset ID. It's automatically applied the retention label. And the content's actually inside of this as well. So those 2 documents we uploaded are inheriting everything. So hands off for the users, hands-on for the records folks, but hands-on for the records folks in the compliance center side of things. They don't need to be in this area. Now you can run reports and Power BI reports to see how many contracts are dormant and they're sitting there. This can be done with case files, of course. HR is another very, very popular example, invoicing, where you have multiple components, purchase orders and stuff, but the same concept can apply. Keep the users out of it, flip a flag, flip a metadata field, react accordingly automatically on the record side. So second piece I want to show off in terms of capabilities here is in employee files. So again, that social security number, social insurance number example, if we're inside of an employee file, we can have a number of different templates and folders inside of a document set. This happens to be my employee file. There's some onboarding documents. When people start here at Cadence Solutions, we have them fill out an employee data sheet. In that data sheet, we have a bunch of information: who's your emergency contact, what's your birth date, all that sensitive information that we don't want really somebody getting their hands on. So as we put in a document, I'll just open this one up so you can take a look. We can have a social security number inside of it. Now, I'm going to just take that out for now. And we're going to upload this document. Somebody uploads this document, it does not contain sensitive information, but sensitive information may be added at some point. On this document, there's different, of course, sharing rights that can happen with this document. Right now, anybody with the link in our Cadence demo environment can access it. We can share it with specific people. We can grant specific people access. We can allow editing. All of this can start to be restricted automatically by the system based on pattern recognition or sensitivity labels and types on the contents inside the document. So I mentioned earlier, this is one of those jaw-dropping features that we've seen, or that when I first saw it, that really started to change the game and put 365 just one level up on everybody else. So I pasted in a social security number. It instantly goes through and flags it as this has PII in it. And now everything behind the scenes starts firing again. We don't need our users to go in here and say, this is a confidential or protected ABC. We can do all that automatically. We can flag it with different sensitivity levels if we like. And they do have the option here, and we can enable that option. But if we let the system take care of it for them, they're a lot more on board when we roll out a new application, when we're migrating all that content from shared drives and everything else into 365. So think of your migration potential. If you can migrate in a bunch of content, it can automatically start to tag and lock down content because of the contents inside of the documents and records. It starts to make projects go a lot easier than when even we first started in 2013 rolling out applications. So because this document is now locked down and contains sensitive information, you can see a little icon here, and it's saying some commands aren't available. Those commands are things like sharing outside the organization and the ability to do some of those things. Now, if you're one of the users, we can send off alerts. So I'm logged in as Adam Minton right now. It's going to give me a notification to say access to this item is blocked except for its owner, yada, 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 last modifier, and a few others that we're able to opt in. So you can be warned as well. Again, that's a training/change management activity that's happening without you needing to handhold users along the way. So lots of different features that can kind of fire out of the system without needing to expand into third-party applications or spend oodles of money on consultants to configure things for you. So Kevin and Therese, I just want to do a time check because I know I can babble for quite a while. So
you are doing great, Jordan. I know we do have some questions coming in for you from our audience, so please be sure to be aware of that as we want to make sure we have some time for that as well.
So how many minutes do I have left, Kevin? Let me put you on the.
Well, let's see here. You have about what is it, 7 minutes or so?
About 7 minutes total. Go about 4 more minutes here, and then we'll take questions.
Awesome. Okay.
Sounds great.
Okay, so I'm going to show. Let's go into the pattern recognition. We'll skip holds today. So I'm going to show some of the abilities in the information protection area of 365 to go through and actually start to define those patterns that you want to be looking for and what's really built in here. Now, I'm not sure of the skill set and the exposure from the crowd here today. So if you've seen this, bear with me. If you haven't, I'll show you a few things here. So inside of our sensitivity label, we can define it as we like. We're going to say it's PII and display it as such. We can determine our scope. Do we want it on files and emails? Where do we want to go with our scope of this label? We want to encrypt the files and emails as well, if they do contain, in our instance, the social security number, social insurance number, driver's license numbers. And then when we get to this screen, we're starting to decide, what are we doing for the encryption side of things? Are we assigning permissions now? Are we giving users access to content that expires? Who's our co-authors and those permissions? What are we actually looking for? And auto-labeling for files and emails. So just in our demo environment, we grabbed kind of the most likely, North American patterns we'd see. So in Canada, we've got social insurance numbers, health numbers, passport numbers, of course, SSNs, driver's license, TINs, and you can set your confidence rating and your instance counts. So there's different ways to go deeper into this to determine confidence ratings and exposure. You can't just put in the social security number and have it fire up. You have to have SSN or the word social security number nearby or a certain count of that to start to make it register. There is ways to test this without having to deploy it. And the result of everything is when content matches, what do we want to do? Do we want to apply the label automatically? Do we want to display a custom message to people? So our message is PII data is detected. Our organization's applied this for you and encrypted the content. So again, that's a quasi change management activity. They're aware that something's happening, that something they put in their content is now flagged. So it really aids, again, Peggy's, and I didn't talk to Peggy before this, but the whole meet your users in the tools, and the tools can do a lot more for you now than they could in the past. So I guess my portion of this day at the event today, I wanted to kind of show off more of the tools and stay out of the PowerPoint world. I think you probably get some more of that a bit later today, so you didn't need more of that from me. Kevin, maybe I'll throw it back to you. I think we got some questions, and we'll
all right.
Yes,
that sounds great. We do have several questions coming in here for you, Jordan. What licensing is required for the capabilities that you have demonstrated? What add-ons are required? That a couple of people are asking about that, and specifically, does it require higher level E5 or G5 government licenses?
So yes, E5, G5, A5, so the 5 series for a lot of the out-of-the-box records features. What we've talked with a lot of executives and sponsors and records people with is they're usually sitting on a 3 series or something lower, and they have to go do that business case or internal sales pitch to get bumped up from a 3 to 5 series to do records management. How we approach that, as if we're along with you for the ride, is the 5 series of 365 brings a lot more with it than just the record side. So if you get an ally in IT to go and start to present and pitch the executives and the folks with the money, that might be the C-level or municipalities, your CAO. There's other things you can roll out. We've rolled out Teams calling, so elimination of cell phones, instant return on investment. Records is the throw-in essentially in that then. So 5 series in short. On our website, the reason I pulled this up is we do have a webinar specifically on licensing, and it covering the differences between the 1, 3, and 5 series of so E1, E3, and E5. So there's about a 20-minute or so webinar on that. I won't bore you today with that stuff. So,
can you detect and run a report on encrypted files in the environment? Also, how about the files that are individually encrypted? For example, with a password, I encrypt with a file with a password.
So I'm not sure on the password one. In short, we can report on anything that's flagged in the Compliance Center through Power BI. Again, in the E5 series, that's a benefit you get by moving from 3 to 5. You get Power BI on the desktop, so more reporting capabilities. So we can pull back anything that has PII, anything that has a specific label. If it has that label, it inherently is encrypted, so we know that information can report back on that.
All right, very good. That is Jordan Uderhagen, Managing Director of Cadence Solutions. Jordan, thank you so much for being with us today.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.
All right, well, let's move on to our next presenter today, Jeff Melnick. Jeff, are you with us?
I am. How are you guys doing? Can you hear me?
We can hear and see you just fine, Jeff. Thank you so much. All right, with us today is Jeff Melnick, Global Director of Technical Solutions for Arctis. And he's here to talk with us about tips for secure collaboration and guest access in M365 and Teams. And we'll explore the dynamics of Teams and how data is shared under the hood to ensure consistent governance and security across the apps that underpin Teams. So, Jeff, welcome aboard. Please tell us more.
Hey, thanks a lot, Kevin. So yeah, I'll go through and dive in a little bit with Teams, some of the interesting bits and pieces. Just as a side note, because we talked about it earlier, it is Arctis, and it's actually short for architected trusted information sharing. So that's really what we're about, and allowing sort of secure collaboration. So let me dive right in and talk a little bit about Teams. On the left-hand side, I actually pulled this directly from Microsoft's own site. This is how they define Microsoft Teams, and I bolded the end piece because I thought that was pretty relevant. It's the all in one place, all in the open, all accessible to everyone. And that's one of the great things about Teams. It's a great collaboration tool. We use it extensively here, and I think many others do as well. Unfortunately, a lot of people are a little bit terrified about how open it can be. It can be very, very easy to share, a little too easy to share. And so there are definitely some concerns about over collaboration. And obviously, this is not a small issue. On the right here, I've got some statistics, and I'll actually add one as well, which is from April of 2020 to April of 2021, Teams grew pretty significantly, went from 70 million users to 145 million users. So basically doubled in size in the span of 1 year. And then in the next quarter alone, from April to July of 2021, exploded really from 145 million to 250 million. So that is a massive number of users and a massive number of organizations that are currently using Teams and have obviously some concerns with how to leverage Teams and specifically how to leverage it securely. So one of the questions we often get asked is, hey, how can you help us with Teams? And, can you audit Teams? And a lot of times the answer to that is, well, what part of Teams are you really looking at? What part of Teams are you concerned about? And some people are under the mistaken impression that Teams is an application and it runs and everything's cool. And it's not. It's really more of a platform, really relying on a number of additional applications that all kind of ride underneath the hood. So I think all of us are familiar with the sort of chat and meeting functions associated with Teams. I think a lot of us know that Office 365 users and groups are really kind of the security baseline that we ride on, and that most of those files are stored in SharePoint, except when they're not, in which case they're usually stored in OneDrive or in a different place, depending. So we've got some stuff in Exchange. It's kind of all over the place. So you've got obviously chat, you've got telephony if you're, again, using telephony. So there's a lot of sort of bits and pieces that go together within Teams to really make the magic happen, as it were. And so again, just want to give you guys a little bit of an idea, if you're not familiar with Teams and sort of the, under the hood, how all these different bits and pieces actually come together. So as far as things like where files are stored, you'll see, again, a lot of the stuff's in SharePoint, except when it's not. And a lot of that is sitting in Exchange. So they use Exchange pretty heavily for things like journaling, for compliance. So you'll see that for the messages and the images. Files are stored, again, in SharePoint, except when they're not. So if I put something into the chat for an example, it's actually going to get dropped into my OneDrive. And anyone who's a member of the chat will now be given access to that file in my OneDrive. And that can be concerning for some as well, because you get all kinds of permission sprawl in this case. So again, you've got these different bits and pieces. Again, if you're using some of the telephony and then the voicemail, That's going to leverage Exchange. The recordings are leveraged by Stream. And then again, things like Calendar, Contacts, and actually OneNote as well. You know, those first two pieces are in Exchange, obviously, but they're all kind of hidden by default. So again, a lot of that stuff we can pull out. And then of course there's some telemetry data as well that Microsoft keeps for more of an operational perspective, just to kind of make sure things are running well. So again, when you create a team, I think a lot of people think, hey, I just create a team and everything's good to go. And what you're doing is actually creating a Microsoft 365 group. On the flip side, by the way, if you add an external user, you'll add them as a Microsoft 365 user as well. You'll also, again, create a SharePoint Online site. That's where all the sort of documents are going to be stored for that team. And then again, you've got Exchange Online, where it's going to hold the mailbox and the calendar, which are hidden by default. And again, OneNote. So if you wanted to uncover that, you can do that pretty easily by just going to the tabs. And then, of course, you've got things like Power BI and Planner and some of the other bits and pieces that get created. And even though they're not necessarily surfaced to you right away, they're in the background when you create this team. So hopefully that gives you a little bit better understanding as far as, again, sort of the back-end architecture of teams. So let's talk a little bit about some of the common 365 attacks. And one of the things that's interesting about this list, you've got phishing emails, obviously spear phishing, malware, etc. This list I could put up for almost any platform, right? I mean, these are all pretty common attack vectors. One of the things that's interesting is Office 365 is no different in this case. They're still using the same mechanisms. So, for example, it was about a year and a half ago, I received an email from this Nigerian prince who really wanted me to help him out, and I just needed to send him some money, and he would send me even more money for, you know, going through that effort. And one of the things I thought about that particular email that I had received was, wow, this is the first time I'd ever gotten this email in the wild, and you know, that's pretty impressive. And then the second one was, does this still work? Like, doesn't everyone know this scam at this point? I mean, and the reality is clearly the answer is no, because these same tools and tactics are used, and they're updated slightly, but we're still using a lot of social engineering attacks. We still see those. Microsoft accounts get hacked far more frequently than anyone would like to admit. And again, it's all these types of issues, and it works pretty well. So what are some of the things you can do to protect yourself against these types of attacks? One, enforce least privilege. And I would say that really across all your environment, all your systems, et cetera. Fortunately, most people have really made a heavy lean into this, which is cool. Obviously, small organizations sometimes do not. You know, they still have people where upper level people who should have much more compartmentalized security do not. But again, I think a lot of organizations are leaning much more heavily into this idea, which is awesome. Also doing things like enforcing multi-factor authentication. Now, Microsoft has done an awesome job about this, basically browbeating you mercilessly into doing this whether you want to or not. And that can create its own challenge, but they've actually done a great job with forcing most of the Microsoft 365. Any new tenants that you spin up will basically require multi-factor authentication. So that's awesome. And then things like limiting external sharing to trusted accounts. And this is a challenge because we want to be able to share data across the organization and across other organizations. And so you get some issues with, you know, usability and collaboration versus security. And so Teams is very binary for the most part. We either, you know, you can either allow external users to access stuff or not. That's really about as binary it gets. And so to get around some of these issues, many IT groups are saying, hey, we're not going to allow you to share things externally. However, we will, if you'd like, go in and create an account specifically for an external user so that they can get in and access our system. And that is definitely a relatively effective way at leveraging that and then kind of pulling down that access. But now it's just another thing that IT has to do. You have to go through and create a ticket, et cetera, give them all that contact information, et cetera. So it's not necessarily an easy thing to do in this case. The fourth is blocking email client forwarding rules. And this is an interesting one. I've had a couple of questions about, hey, well, why is that? If I gain access to your account, I obviously gain access to your files, at least, as long as I have access. But if I can create a mail forwarder, I now have access to all of your emails. And if you think about some of the sensitive data that you send via email and that you receive via email, you probably don't want that going outside. So again, the ability to block those email client forwarding rules, because if I gain access to your account as an attacker, I'm totally going to try to set that up, right? That's just a great way to pull information out of your organization. So again, would certainly recommend that. And then again, number 5 is utilizing cloud apps, security, auditing, et cetera. I know a lot of organizations leverage multiple solutions because, again, it's very hard to get a one-size-fits-all for everything. I know some obviously that don't leverage any of these. Unfortunately, they try to rely just on the built-in Microsoft stuff, and that can be challenging as well. But if you are looking for a cloud app for security and auditing, I might have an app for that. But going back to multi-factor for just a moment, a lot of people say, oh, well, I have multi-factor, I'm good to go. I have no worries. And that's awesome that you have multi-factor, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't have any potential issues. So one of the interesting things that are out there is, hey, this is an email from your IT group, some problems with your account, you may or may not be able to log in. Why don't you click this link, verify that you can log in, and if you can, hey, that's awesome. And if not, make sure you contact us because clearly you're having some problems. And then what you do is when you click on that and it asks you for your credentials, obviously they're going to steal your username and your password. However, with multi-factor, as soon as they get as soon as you go through that secondary authentication step, whether it's authentication app or what have you, it's going to generate an access token. And that's really what they're going to steal, because they have the access token, and while they have your username and password, now they don't need multi-factor authentication because you've already provided that to them. And so now I have a great way to just get into your system and do whatever I want. Now, the caveat is it's only good for a relatively short duration of time. It's good for about 15, 20 minutes, where that attacker can take that access token and basically walk right into your environment as that user. So again, it's great that it doesn't last forever, but again, they got 15, 20 minutes. They're going to do as much as they can. So if they're an admin, obviously they can go through, they can create new accounts with admin rights. This way, I don't need to go through and do anything else. Again, I can set up forwarding rules. And as a regular user, I can go through and I can invite others, right? So I can invite my good friend, hacker123 at Gmail into the organization, and now they have access to your data as well. Again, if you've allowed external access. So having multi-factor authentication is awesome. It's not a silver bullet. So just please be aware of that, and be aware that there are still some caveats associated with these where even if you have multi-factor and you do all the right things, you might have a user that's just, I don't want to say is going out of their way to thwart you, but, and I think, unfortunately, a lot of people are like, oh, well, users, they're dumb. They're going to mess up. But the reality is admins get snagged pretty frequently. I actually had an IT director way back when the PayPal was first getting exploited. Went in first thing in the morning, didn't have his coffee. They asked him to log in. He logged into his account. And as soon as he had logged in, he was like, ooh, the eyes got real wide. He's like, oh, what have I done? Immediately logged in, changed the password, emailed everyone else, which he received a lot of grief about, hilariously, but good on him for letting everyone know. And then he happened to call PayPal and they're like, yeah, your account's been locked out like 5 times in the last 10 minutes. So clearly they were not quite quick enough, but we're pretty quick to try to pull that money out. So again, anybody can get hit if you, especially first thing in the morning, you're hitting through your email and you haven't had your first cup of coffee. So Don't think it's just users. And again, if an admin gets out there, and again, this is where that compartmentalization of those permissions come in, you're going to want to make sure they have as little attack surface available as possible. So when you're setting up sort of Teams governance and security, and hopefully you've at least given this a little bit of thought, these are some of the things we'd recommend you take a quick look at. So things like who actually has access to your teams, especially things like external users. I run into issues all the time where people have access to stuff, people put sensitive documents out there, they don't realize who's actually a member of that team. Could be somebody internally, actually. Even worse with somebody external, some of the M&A information, all the salaries, stuff like that, that's a problem. What activity is taking place within your teams? So again, you have a lot of activity in there, you got a lot of reads, you got a lot of downloads, what's going on within teams, who's allowed to create them as well, that's sometimes a question. Again, you get stuck between, I want to make this usable, and I want to give as many tools to users to collaborate as possible. But then, on the security side, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. So you need to be aware. Will you be sharing sensitive information? So this is an interesting one because I think the answer is always yes. You have to assume that's the case. I'm stunned by the number of clients that I talk to where they're like, no, we're good. We don't have sensitive information out in places where it doesn't belong. I can almost assuredly guarantee that you do. And the reality is people tend to put things in the wrong place, either maliciously or more often just by mistake. Again, it's been a long day. I've got 57 tabs open. I go to drop something in there. I've dropped it in the wrong place. Who hasn't emailed somebody or the entire organization by mistake with, all the salary information of the organization? Hopefully not you, but certainly some people have. And again, do you require information barriers? So information barriers is an interesting piece as well. We see this a lot with things like law firms, where we need to prevent certain users from communicating with other users, often because they're working, both sides of the fence on a legal team. So I've got one client over here, and I've got a lawyer within the same firm in some cases representing the other side of that case. So ethically, they can't talk to each other. More frequently, we see that as well with things like M&A. So we see, we've bought this organization, and the parent organization wants to see everything that's going on in there, but they want that to be kind of a one-way trust in that case. We want to be able to see the information, the things they're doing, and push certain things out, but we don't want them to be able to see data that belongs to us. And then lastly, guest access. Again, on, off, up to you guys, but again, there's the ease of use versus some of the other challenges. So real quick, and I realize I've probably run out of time, so I should kick up the pace a little before I get the hook, but some of the questions that we get here at Arcus as far as requests, things like more granular guest access. I want guests only be able to access certain types of data. True read-only access. So for example, if I have read-only access in Microsoft, I still have the ability to download that data, copy that data, etc. A lot of people don't want that to be available, and we can help with that. We can do something like, hey, true read-only access is applied to all guests, so guests do not have any capabilities of downloading it. Trimming file views based on files and attributes. So again, guests don't have access to sensitive data, or no one outside of HR or director level has the ability to see HR sensitive documents, those types of things. Trimming the ribbon as far as what users can do. Again, do you want them to be able to download stuff? Automatically unsharing files from the chat, that's a cool one as well. So we've had a couple organizations ask us about that. Not possible to do currently natively in Teams, where you can kind of time bomb stuff like that. So being able to unshare stuff after a year is a request we get pretty frequently. And again, things around activity and permission auditing as well. So let me wind this down a little bit. Hopefully you found this interesting. If so, we've got some information out on the website. One's an ebook on preventing oversharing and insider threats in Microsoft Teams. The second is a quick white paper on 10 questions to assess information security needs within teams. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can also hit up our website as well. If you're like, hey, that sounds interesting, I want a demo, let us know. We could set up a sort of traditional demo or a more automated sort of choose your own adventure demo where you can go through and kind of look at some of the stuff that you want to look at. So let us know. And Kevin, questions? Hopefully I didn't run over time. Hopefully I provide just a little.
Thank you, Jeff. Yeah, we do have some questions coming in from the audience. Can you manage any kind of content within Teams?
Pretty much any file type. So we request around things like watermark and CAD files, obviously all the Microsoft type files. So we do support a variety of non sort of Microsoft files as well. So anything that you put up in Teams or SharePoint or SharePoint on-prem, we can either trim out or provide secure viewing.
And how difficult is it to apply some of these same security policies and techniques across other Microsoft 365 apps?
So it's actually relatively easy, which is nice. A lot of times if you want to do something in SharePoint versus Teams, that's kind of a hassle. You kind of have to reinvent the wheel a little bit. In this case, you just specify the scope, and that can be globally across everything, where we're able to go out and say, hey, again, pretty common ones that are easy to run right out of the box is, guests only have access to just view data. It's watermarked, and they don't have the ability to see sensitive data in any way, shape, or form. And we can kind of do that across the board very easily.
Very good. That is Jeff Melnick, Global Director of Technical Solutions at Arctis. Jeff, thank you so much for being a part of our event today.
Hey, thanks a lot, Kevin. Appreciate it.
Very good. All right. Well, let's keep moving right along and introduce our next guest, Sean Achampong. Sean, are you with us?
Yep, I'm here. Hey, Kevin. Hi, everybody.
Hello, Sean. Very good. We would like to welcome Sean Achampong to the program. Sean is the CEO and founder of Tumi Transformations, and Sean is a longtime member of AIIM and has great experience in the real world in records management, governance, and content management. Sean, you're here to talk a little bit about balancing user adoption and governance, and it seems to me that is the thin line that we must walk. Certainly want to have information freely available and have collaboration happening freely among our teams and our organization, but at the same time, there's a pressing need to implement good information governance and security to all of the information. What is the priority from your point of view, governance or user adoption?
So great question, great starter, Kevin. And thank you all again for your time today. So to answer the question, it is in terms of priority, first of all, fundamentally, there's a balance with a slight lean towards user adoption. If you don't have content and users and activity and data, then it makes it very hard to manage and establish governance controls. If you start off with heavy controls around access and retention and delineating permissions at a user and a member level in a lot of detail, if you start off with these heavy controls, people will quickly say like, well, my desktop is working just as good. Confluence, IBM FileNet, their other systems, they're back of their trunk. They'll say all these other methods are more convenient to me, even Outlook. So I like to start off with user adoption as the primary. Get people in, get them comfortable, not just logging in, but adding documents, sharing those documents via link, co-authoring, chatting, and even touching the waters with automating routine and repetitive services. If you build traction, at a process level or a key enterprise or cross-departmental, even a departmental level, you build those nuggets of day-to-day practice and harness user adoption, then it makes it a lot easier to apply information governance. And M365 platform, it's a lot easier than it used to be to catch up and apply controls and records retention labels and data security after the fact. So that long-winded response is I lean more towards getting people in and get them comfortable, and then build awareness for governance and add those controls over time.
We were talking earlier, and you mentioned stages of user adoption. What do you mean by that? And are there stages of user adoption to consider? And if so, how do I build that into my plans?
Yes, so you want to make user adoption something that is thoughtful, and you want to go beyond just ensuring people have access or have an account. And so I'll walk you through the stages for consideration. Stage one is about orientation, getting in there, logging in, making sure you've MFA, you've authenticated the users, give them awareness to Teams and to SharePoint sites and to things even like Planner, so that they gain some exposure and start to blend the waters of how to access the environment. Stage two is about usage, and that's saying, okay, I'm in, I'm sold. Now we want to take all of our 2021 content and from our filing cabinets or our shared drive and put it in, and we want to build net new content in this environment, all our 2022 files. We want to start creating and sharing directly in the site. After a while, you go into stage three, and that's around trust. It's less about the technology and more about the culture. So you want to hear things like at the water cooler where people are saying, hey, where's this particular file? Oh, it's in our eDocs site, or it's in our project planning SharePoint site, or we have it in a Teams chat. You want to build a degree of confidence or trust that this is the reliable source of information, trusted, and it's done in a routine way. And that's the number three is extremely important. You want to get to that stage of trust where people are anecdotally referring to their SharePoint sites, their chats, planners, etc., in an anecdotal way. You know that it's something of confidence that they believe contains reliable information. And once you have that reliability of process and culture and trust, then you get into stage four, and that's around streamlining business processes. Right off the top, you'll see just in using M365 and SharePoint, Teams, etc., you should see roughly a 20% administrative time savings. But there's so much more it can do to automate and streamline your world. So now that you have trusted and reliable information from stage three, now you can really rethink the way we currently do business processes and the way we, in the future state, how we could, through automation, in place of creating an email, attaching links to it, send it to someone else for review, sending to someone else for approval. You can automate all that stuff. And with a backbone of reliable data, now you can drive those process automations and bring the overall cost and time of doing business way down. And finally, step 5 is about systems integration. Now that you have reliable data, reliable processes, now it's time to rethink systems integration, be it with Dataverse or between your structured data and your unstructured information. You have an invoice in your financial system, invoice 2022-001, and now you have the unstructured documents inside of your in your SharePoint site that shows invoice 2002.01. Now you can create one-to-one pairing, a much cleaner degree of mapping. If you try to map and do systems integration without trusted and reliable data, you'll get spaghetti. It'll be all over the place. So those are the 5 stages of adoption to consider.
Sean, you've been working in the industry for over 20 years. You've had great experience in sectors like government, energy, retail, banking, and many others. Are there common pitfalls to avoid in all of those industries? And are there specific things that we should look out for if we are in a specific industry like government or energy or retail?
Pitfalls to avoid, yes. You want to start with keeping your implementation, be it of SharePoint, you want to keep it simple, clean, and vanilla. So I'll give you examples of that. Many organizations have plugins, be it for email management or APIs or connections to different systems, lookup values. Start clean, especially with the plugins relating to email, because it'll put wrappers on top of how Outlook loads. Some of them do and don't have online Outlook Online plugins as well. And then when you see your content, be it in Teams or SharePoint, you'll see additional buttons and plugins that are akin to the plugin itself. Start extremely clean. You want your base users to have an out-of-the-box understanding of how the system works, and then let them reassert the need for better email governance and email management after the fact. Yeah, you want them to learn the core technology around versioning control and access and search and document sets, content types, etc., and then build up from there. So hold off a little bit on plugins. Subsites as well. You might have a deep organizational series of subsites, but information gets buried there. So when considering something like migration, raise all of the sites, the subsites up to a standard level, a top level site. As it gets buried deeper and deeper, it's harder to control permissions, harder to govern the types of content and records you have in there. Yeah, keep it clean, bring it all up to the top level. Third point is to create as much as possible. And when I say groups, excuse me, when I say groups, I'm talking about when you create a group, you can create a group just with a named body of users, or you can create a group that also includes Team, SharePoint, Planner, OneDrive, or OneNote, a Dataverse instance, a Power Automate instance, all within that group. So it harnesses everything together, so so that users aren't creating a SharePoint site, then having a group over here that has all of those pieces already included. So consider grouping all of the interplay or collaboration everyone has into one experience. Final thing I'll say is when you're moving into this environment, and I've seen this across industries, it might sound controversial, I'm gonna appears in here, but my recommendation is to move it now and clean it later, okay? You can clean your data and your sites and your content offline, change the formats, but it's a lot harder. Inside of M365, you have Power Automate, you have searching with views, you have site columns, managed properties. You have a whole rich series of tools to automate the cleanup and simplify end user part in the cleanup. I'm actually doing like 3 projects right now where we're doing large data transformation and cleanup. And it's a heck of a lot easier than doing it, say, 10 years ago in Excel and XML and databases. Oh my gosh, it was a nightmare. And the tools in M365 are a lot easier to use. So it might sound controversial. I'm a records manager as well, but I beg of you, consider move now first and clean it later, okay? All right.
Interesting perspective. Now, Sean, is there a difference in how to set up and govern teams when my organization is using it for transitory information versus using the Microsoft environment as the system of record?
Yes, and it comes down to, there's 3 considerations. You have chats, you have OneDrive, and you have SharePoint. And then at the Teams admin level, you have controls over usage and classification. So let me break those all down. If you're using your Teams for transitory information, you want to start off by making that visibly known and intentional, because the last thing you want is people informally working on in it and then realizing, hey, we're using it to gauge approvals and share documents or enable external access to people without controls. So typically what I do scenarios like this is put a 2-year cutoff or expiration. And make sure that those policies are socialized so that chats are expiring after 2 years. And to set up chats, with your personal chats, it's a private folder inside of Outlook, so it connects with your compliance, your retention labels. You can find those mailboxes and apply retention controls there. Similarly, in OneDrive, you can apply retention controls at 2 years, and your SharePoint site as well, right to at the site level, at the content type level, at the metadata level, even. You can apply 2-year wrappers on your content as well. Yeah, so it naturally holds it for longer term and to be used as a system of record without applying those controls. And I strongly recommend applying proper records retention controls and data sensitivity labels. But for your transitory, you have to be extremely intentional that this is transitory, short-term use, content is destroyed routinely at 2 years, and then use the methods that I've described to apply those controls.
Now, you talked about moving now and cleaning later. What about tips for going back and adding the controls and rules in Teams after deployment and after we've learned how to use it? Would that make sense?
Yes, it's yeah. So you would start from your site admin pages, and that is the norm. Like through the pandemic, people have been the usage of Teams has exploded because it's just a handy central vehicle to enable chat, online video meetings, and plus share documents. So the usage has exploded tremendously since the pandemic. If you're working in an environment where Teams has been deployed, there's tens or hundreds or even thousands of Teams out there, start with your site admin pages. And this is a relationship between you and IT to understand all of the different teams that may have been instantiated during this time. And then start to classify them. These are particular subjects or projects or departments. Establish categorization and proper naming conventions around your teams. Socialize it first, but go in your site admin pages and start renaming them with either numerical or alphanumerical naming convention. You also have templates at your disposal too. So you can structure group policies and different types of sites and teams for projects or communications or a committee. There's pre-canned templates right inside of Teams to apply and establish more degrees of control over time as well. But this is very much an analysis and a relationship with your IT admin to look at the site admin and see everything holistically, and then start applying rules right at the top.
We are speaking with Sean Akchampong, CEO and founder of To Me Transformations. I've been hogging up all the questions, so if you have any questions for Sean, please do feel free to enter it into the Q&A feature here, and we'll see if we can get those questions in front of Sean as well. Now, Sean, as you mentioned, and as we know, the adoption of Teams has skyrocketed. What about Teams sites? How do I best approach the retention or decommission of Teams sites? When, how, why? What about retention, expiration of things like chats and so forth? What is the best strategy there?
I'd start off with first determining what's active and inactive, right? And then so right in the Teams admin page, you will see all your teams, and it will show you which teams have not been active in, say, 30 days, 6 months, a year. And I would start with that first. And then I'd identify who's the owner or originator of this team. And as I was saying before, establish naming conventions for that. The security and compliance, now they used to be security and compliance, now they're independent modules. You can start there with establishing data sensitivity labels. So out of the box, it gives you things like credit card. It will screen out credit cards or foul language, things like that. But you can build in controls for sensitive words and keywords. And this is a learned thing as well that you can apply with Power Automate, where it's adding new terms or using the AI builder to establish better classification as time goes on. So it has a rich series of tools, and I just want to be honest, so we're exploring them now and testing them out with our clients. And as the businesses tell us about it, as we deep dive into their processes, it's giving us more terminologies that we can apply to our data sensitivity labels to screen out and classify or do what we have to do with different chats and contents that are happening. The same thing can be said with records retention. Out of the box, it applies records retention to Outlook, even the private chat messages that are the private folder I mentioned earlier. Plus you have OneDrive, SharePoint, etc. So you can pick and choose where those retention labels are applied as policies directly to any sites, right? And the controls behind the scenes to make it based on metadata, make it based on keywords, make it based on content types, or even holistically at the site. I've noticed over the past 3 years, the ability to apply retention controls at a deeper and deeper level is getting a lot more refined. My experience a few years ago in this with the retention labels deployment, they only had specific or auto classify, and I was like, ooh, auto classify. Then you realize it's an E5 license, and the organization is not going to pay for everyone to have an E5 license. So, using automation and really strong analysis, we've been able to leverage automation and really well-defined information architectures and document sets where people just dragging a document in and it's inheriting the right metadata and terms and stuff as they're using their files. So auto classification sounds great. And if we have that cash for everyone to have an E5 license, let's have it. But there's a lot of other techniques to create an auto classification experience with strong information architecture design and just targeted deployment of those labels.
Sean, it's been great speaking with you. We're almost out of time, but before I let you go, one last question. What are some of the cool Microsoft apps that organizations might not be using, but we should investigate and consider?
Ooh, great question. I love that they're doing their best to bring multiple worlds together. A few apps to consider, bookings. So if you're engaging with external and internal people and you need to showcase calendars with dates, times. Recently just did one for a church. They did online masses and stuff for the past year and a half. So bookings as an externally and internally facing app that comes to you for free, part of your subscription, where you can coordinate schedules, times, dates at a massive level, and then automate it in the back end wherever you want that data to go. Next is the Power Platform. So that is Power BI, Power Automate, and Power Apps. All three of those together are incredibly strong to automate and streamline activity and bring a lot of better data insights to the business community. Dynamics is incredibly strong, which is the CRM platform. It integrates so well, and its backend is Dataverse, which is your big database. You can think of it as like Access on steroids, but I'm really underselling how powerful Dataverse is. It integrates a lot of different pieces together. Stream is like your internal YouTube, and Planner is your pseudo project planning for like informal scrum boards and the ability to manage tasks at a really quick and efficient level. So those are a few apps to consider to explore and have fun with.
Well, Sean, it's been great speaking with you today. Thank you so much for being with us on our event today.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you, Kevin, and thank you, everyone. Namaste. Have a good day.
That is Sean Chom, I'll say this right, Champong,
There you
Sean
go.
Champong from To Me Transformations. Thank you, Sean.
Thank you.
All right, well, I guess that brings us to our mid break. I'd like to turn it back over to Teresa to tell us more. Teresa?
Yes, we are going to take basically just like a 5-minute break. Definitely planning to be back at 12:45 Eastern time. Just a couple of things in these next couple of minutes. Just want to tell you a little bit what's going on at AIIM, and certainly just want to thank the underwriters and contributors that we have with us today. Thank you to ActiveNav, Archtis, Cadence Solutions, Proven Tech, and certainly we just heard from Sean at To Me Transformations, and we'll hear from Microsoft a little bit later today as well. So just wanted to thank them for everything that they are doing to help us put on this free event for you today. And just a couple of just quick things to mention. You've probably heard us talk about AIM Plus. Encourage you to check it out. So either this URL, aim.org/aim-plus or aim.org/join. They'll both take you to the same page. And it's just a place we're offering to information professionals this robust collection of information, of educational content, and just also to have you connect with your peers in our buzzing online community. So just encourage you to check this out and learn a little bit more. Monthly and annual subscriptions are available, and there's just a wealth of educational opportunities in here, and just a way for you to learn more and help you tackle all of your challenges. And also, and again, you've probably heard, AIM 22 is coming up. We will be live in Denver. This will be live. And AIM 22 promises to be a conference unlike you've ever experienced before. This has been redesigned for optimum engagement. The AIM 22 is an event where work gets done together to solve information-centric issues. So we encourage you to join us, take your organization to new heights, and just go to aimconference.com for more information and the latest lineup of the types of sessions and who all's going to be there. So I look forward to seeing you there. Hope you will join us as well. So just in the next couple of minutes of the break, this is the fun of having a live event where I get to do live sound checks with the people who are going to be joining us this afternoon. And just to make sure that we're here, we can see them, we can hear them, like all that kind of fun stuff. So I'm just going to go through and for those speakers who are here ready to go, just to do that sound check with you. So feel free to mute yourself as we get in here. So I just wanted to check in with our dynamic duo, Mimi Dion and Gordon Brown.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hello, everybody.
Gordon, when you unmuted, there was just like a bit of a feedback sound. That's what caught me off there.
Good afternoon. I'm shutting down some other apps just so I'm not pestered by them. My apologies.
That sounds good. We'll be hearing from Mimi and Gordon right after this brief break. So thank you very much for that sound check. Rakesh, I just wanted to do your sound check now, and feel free to come on camera, test the slide share, all of that, just to make sure that all that's going to work great for you here.
Yeah. Hi, Teresa. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. I can see you. That's looking really good.
Yeah.
Okay. And let's see here. The other speaker that I'm hoping to have logged in here, I'm not seeing Melson here yet, or Mason, we'll say this yet.
Hey, Teresa, it's Marissa with ActiveNav. Mason will be here shortly.
Okay, that sounds good. And I just checking my messages here. Roberto Iglesias from Microsoft will be joining us closer to his speaking time towards the end of our event, Microsoft will be closing out. So we can hear a little bit of that roadmap of what they're working on now and what they're looking just ahead in regards to governance and records management. And so Roberto will be joining us for that part of the conversation as well. So, certainly a great lineup that we have here coming up. And I definitely want to thank everybody who has been attending and listening throughout the day. I certainly value your time that you give to us for these events. And one of the other things that I just want to pop in here real quickly. Again, just mentioning up here who our contributors are for our event today. And Kevin, I know we're going to hear from you as we close out the event today. What do you think? I've just been so excited and engaged listening to everybody who's presented thus far. So what have been your thoughts so far?
Well, it's been good to get a couple of things have stood out for me. It's good to get a little bit of a glimpse underneath the hood of Teams, how data is stored in Teams, and what we need to do to bring some of that information together in some of our strategies. And as Peggy noted, the rapid adoption of 365, the pace of development is really bringing us to an era where we are considering Teams to be sort of a baseline, or not just Teams, but the whole M365 environment, really a baseline tool for how business gets done today. And really, we need to really start regarding it maybe in a little different way. It's not just a product anymore. It's really an environment that almost everyone is using in some way.
Yes. Let's see here. Gordon, I just sent you an email with what you just asked for. And I know that we have a couple more minutes in this break time. And just to fill that time, let me go ahead and launch another poll question that we have. And Kevin, let's go ahead and take a look at this. So here is our next poll question. So, folks, if you come up to your keyboards and go ahead and answer this for us, what about Microsoft 365 are you most interested in learning about today? Now, we've already heard a little bit earlier today. We're going to hear a little bit more in the coming couple of hours, but just what are you most interested in learning? How to push things how to push the out-of-the-box capability of M365 as far as possible? Are you looking to learn how to build strategies for pulling other content repositories under the M365 governance umbrella? How to recognize when additional applications are needed to make the most of the M365 experience? Or are you most interested in learning just how the M365 platform will likely evolve in the future? I'm just looking to get just your initial feedback on what it is that you're most excited to be hearing today. So it's looking like just about half of you are listing your highest priority of just how to push out of the box capabilities with M365. And I'm also seeing a few of you commenting that you want more than one option.
All of the above. Right?
All of the above, yes.
Yeah. Is there a choice D? That's what we want to know.
I should have put that in there. My bad.
Or E, I guess. Right.
Yes. Yeah. So and I think that we've been hearing some really good insights about how to push those capabilities, but certainly how other systems can enhance the ability to do that well and have that mesh within your organization. So I think that this has just been really good to hear all this. So actually, let me go ahead and end the poll, and let me just share that out there so you all can see. This is about what Kevin and I were just seeing with the responses that have been coming in here. Well, awesome. Thank you. So the clock tells me I have been rambling enough, and it is time for us to get on with the show. So I'm pleased to turn things back over to Kevin Crane to introduce our next set of speakers, and so that we can continue with things. So Kevin, please take it from here.
Thank you, Teresa. And everybody, let's have a round of applause for Teresa Rezic, who puts all of this stuff together behind the scenes. She works very hard to make sure these all run very smoothly. And so thank you, Teresa. We would like to welcome our afternoon keynote presenters today, Mimi Dion and Gordon Brown. Mimi and Gordon, are you with us?
No.
Hello,
Welcome.
Mimi. Hello, Gordon. All right. Mimi Dion is a senior records information manager at McKesson, and Gordon Brown is an information management program manager at Delta Airlines. We'll be looking at Microsoft 365, Outlook, and Exchange, some tools and best practices for good governance, and indeed get a sneak peek into their upcoming training lesson for AIM Plus from the authors themselves. Welcome, Mimi and Gordon. Please tell us more.
Thank you so much.
Why don't you start us off?
No one, you go, Mimi.
Okay, on I go. Hello, everybody. It's so good to be with you. It's always a pleasure to get together with friends, regardless, but especially in this professional setting, to talk about one of our favorite topics, 365 Exchange governance. It doesn't get much better than this. So thank you very much to AIM, to Teresa, to Kevin for his kind facilitation as we embark on about a 30-minute conversation, more like an Ask Us Anything session, but we do want to give you a preview of some of the things we've been working on for your behalf, because we've created a product that we really believe in, that we think you're going to enjoy this course material, beginning with 365 Governance and Exchange and moving on to Teams, OneDrive, SharePoint, and ending in a governance course, how to assemble it all together. So, you know, as we enjoy each other's company in the next half hour, please feel free to use the chat window, because we really want to hear from you on what we can embed in the forthcoming training materials. Gordon?
Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever we find you. It's great to be here. It's great to speak about M365 governance with Mimi, as always. And, you know, just to right off the back of what she's been saying, we've been working really hard to get this tremendous, if I do say so myself, training course that's going to be available soon on AIM Plus. And just to give a little bit of a preview, we went for Exchange Online because we felt that that was one of the first places that people would migrate and start to use M365. We felt it was a good place to start, and actually it's one of the most visible places. You know, if you start to you know, do something with somebody's SharePoint, Teams, and whatever else, obviously, you know, people are into that content. But if you start to do something with their email, that's something else entirely. So we really wanted to make sure that the training isn't just based on this is the technical ways of how to do it, but be informed by our experience on how to actually, in a practical, real world setting, these are the things that you need to think about. These are the people you need to speak to, and practically come out with a plan so that you can actually, in your workplace, do governance in Exchange Online and be successful at it. That's our goal.
Right, and we hope we've delivered, certainly. Some of the practical advice is from very hard-won experience. So we're very forthcoming with some of our lessons learned. Like, for example, you know, before you lift and shift from on-prem to the cloud, what is one of the first struggles you must overcome? Well, the storage cap. for the end users. They're not accustomed to that necessarily. You've got to learn to live within your means. So how do you do that? How do you prepare for the change management that's required not only of the end user, but the policymakers as well? One of the ways to do that is to analyze mailbox usage. How are both the visible default folders and the invisible ones used, especially if you have retention policies already rolled out in the on-prem environment? So we talk about that. What kind of questions are you likely to get from the user community in advance of this tremendous change for them, and how you empower them and reinvigorate, if it needs doing, the records program so that the team is fit to meet the times. Gordon?
Absolutely, and just to add to that, records programs, we may work with individual departments doing some kind of cleanup, file share, their paper records, something like this. There are a few projects where you not only impact potentially every single person in your organization or the vast majority, it's so highly visible and you lead it. IT may have the tools and they may own the tool, but as records and information management professionals, we own the rules. We're going to tell IT, this is what we want you to do. And it's such a rare opportunity to do something on this scale and show the worth and value of your program that realistically you need it to go well. No pressure, but it with such high visibility, you really need to plan it properly.
That's right. And John hit the nail on the head. IT hosts the tools, but IG makes the rules. That is our standby within our industry. Not everyone continues to appreciate that, though. And so there are opportunities to present change management opportunities within the records team so that you may externally face the rest of the organization, especially some of those more heavy hitters on the project team that will implement the migration and the governance associated with it. So we actually take step by step, we lay out in this little breadcrumb trail in this learning lesson, these are the questions you're either going to receive or you should be asking your partners, especially in technology, especially in information security. And we hope this audience considers that a kind of empowerment because those conversations and the resources, Gordon, the fact that you can go out online, anybody can go out online and read the Microsoft white papers. Anyone can go to a technical administrative manual of 365 and glean those governance details. That means the RIM team, especially as project manager, has to be one step ahead of everybody else. And we really spent some time thinking about that as we wrote the course on your behalf. What can we empower you with in terms of lessons learned that benefited our implementation? And surely we are crossing our fingers, hope will benefit yours.
Sure, because you're going to have, IT will want to do one thing. Legal will almost certainly want to do something else. You'll want to do something else. And then as you go down stakeholders, no, my department is special. We've got these special requirements, which really they probably don't have, but everybody thinks they're in a special department. And so you've got all these things to consider before you start, because if you go down the road and do something and then you're having to change it halfway through, you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. You're really in trouble. Take the time to really properly plan it out before you start.
And as we were joining and doing the sound check and video check, we were enjoying other presenters' conversations this morning. We have not neglected to mention the other workloads that store information and exchange as well. So we're beginning that concept of instructing you on the 2 software development kits in 365, Exchange and SharePoint, and teaching you some of those insights, those tips and tricks around, what else is stored there, and therefore, what else do you need to consider when creating that Tetris map of governance in 365. It isn't just about Exchange anymore. Could you focus on the Exchange Administrative Center only? Yeah, you could, but why not leverage the label policies and the retention policies in the Compliance Center? And we break that down for you, at least we begin to talk about that, the difference between the two. And in subsequent lessons, we're really going to dive into the Compliance Center. Erica Telly has written a very good book on compliance and governance in 365. That's PowerShell Independent. We're going to talk a little bit about PowerShell in our course because it will help you create a more robust implementation, especially in the governance module. So be on the lookout for that as well. In other words, it's not just about policy, it's about technical architecture, as well as really how to make 365 sing, the governance sing out of the Compliance Center. Gordon?
What I was delighted to see the results of that poll that people are wanting to maximize out of the box M365. And that's very much where we're coming from. It doesn't require you to have all these extra tools and add-ons and everything else. We realize that for most organizations, you're going to have what comes out of the box, and that's what you're going to have to live with. Now, that comes with certain decisions and compromises, sure. But we really wanted to make it where, you're not stuck with saying, well, we can't afford that add-on. We're going to guide you with out of the box. Now, if you can do some other stuff, then that's great. But if you can't, then these sets of modules is going to be for you.
And we address too the difference of governance between E3 and E5 and what advantages and disadvantages are there. You heard a little bit about that just a minute ago from our wonderful presenter. E5 is expensive and not a lot of organizations can afford E5, even though it may be in the best interest of both the administrator and the end users. E5 is expensive because of processing, the cost of processing all of that data classification. So how do you make E3, if that is what you've been given by sourcing and procurement by technology, how do you really make that those out of the box features work for you? We also address the level of effort that is expected of the records and information management team, information governance team, that's what IG stands for. The information governance folks in the organization, because there is a strong temptation for end users to reach out to the RIM, the IG team, for direct one-on-one guidance. And we talk through the materials, the training materials, suite, portfolio, the package that you should present to the organization, and how you should leverage all of the resources available to you, especially from technology, to run some of that interference on your behalf. Because honestly, your focus, 365 governance is a full-time job. And you should feel comfortable as the IG person to set those boundaries with other teams so you can continue to provide the value, which of course, the mission of IG is truly, in my opinion, to delete, to get some sense of, measurement and sustainability and running a disposition program that's reflective of your records retention schedule. We talk about all of this in the course, but as broad advice that we could offer you in this half hour, don't be afraid to set those boundaries so you can maintain your education level, stay one step ahead of everybody, and run appropriate automated disposition as best as you possibly can.
Sure, everybody can save everything forever. That's the we're going to make, we're the people that say, let's start deleting some of this stuff. And yes, you know, if depending on the size of your organization, and really it might not make any difference. Typically, records teams are not the biggest teams in an organization. You're typically quite busy. You know, if you don't have these pre-prepared statements and trainings and communications, if you start to go too granular with it, you'll never get anywhere with it. You really need to stay at a higher level with it. Otherwise, you'll just get drowned.
Yeah, especially because with our technology partners, storage is always a crisis. Storage is never not a crisis. And you will also, as you proactively design 365 governance, you know, there are those questions that technology will bring you because they heard you're interested in either launching or updating the 365 governance program. It is not outrageous for technology to come to you and say, you know, we found these PSTs over on a file share. What are we going to do about that? Well, that's related to Exchange Online governance. So how do you address that problem? And you'd be surprised at how long research and development of how to answer one simple question like that can take you, unless everybody in your project team, your governance project team, makes it a priority. So we talk about that as well. How do you make 365 governance a priority for everyone involved? And truly, how do you reward everybody for that level of participation? Gordon?
Yep. You know, I guess, you know, Exchange, you know, I think a lot of people got teams in a rush as the pandemic hit. And so they're all so new and there might not be that much content. Exchange is not one of those beasts. Long-standing legacy, huge amounts of stuff, people very personally invested, PST files, some level of chaos. That's what makes it difficult. So yes, you've got to be on your game.
Absolutely. So, you know, that's the great news, everybody. We're not taking a break from, you know, finishing the Exchange Online course. We're launching immediately into Teams, which made logical sense when you look at Exchange Online architecture of a mailbox. Teams chats are stored there. It just seemed a seamless pivot to go straight into, you know, those particular settings in the Compliance Center, which as a result, you will see us break down the Compliance Center settings, and we'll start to really talk about label policies versus retention policies. Label policies meaning explicit retention on one item, as opposed to retention policies, which are, you know, really what you implement at that workload level. Gordon?
Yeah, and you know, Teams made sense because if you can get governance into Teams as soon as you can, then you're going to head off at the pass this horrible chaos. Now, let's be honest, you've got way more team sites than you should. Half of them are probably abandoned, so you've got some level of chaos and cleanup and everything else. But we don't want that to get worse and worse and worse. So Teams made sense to go the next one, and it's now so ubiquitous anyway. You know, it made sense to do that next as well.
For sure. I remember being on a call. This was when the pandemic had started over the summertime, and there was a debate amongst information governance professionals about whether or not Teams hold records. Could you summarily set Teams aside? I think we've learned a little bit more in the past 2 years, at least how to apply disposition principles, regardless of whether your organization considers, you know, whether or not that's a records repository. We can at least teach you how to implement good cleanup policies there, so you can keep things high and tight.
Yes, and how to make, you know, even if you haven't made these decisions up to now, how to make informed choices so that the so that the decision making and the situation doesn't get worse. For example, I think I would recommend that you don't store official records in Teams. It's a more transitory location, but that's up to your organization. And these very fundamental decisions, which you probably didn't have any time to do because IT rolled it out before they spoke to you, you can at least try and catch up.
That's right. And, if you cannot encourage you enough to reach out to your sourcing and procurement folks who are involved with license negotiation with the vendor, because at least the information governance team should be providing the decisions or informing the decisions around whether or not E3 versus E5 or a hybrid of such is right for your organization. I am not embarrassed to say that when I participated in that conversation with my boss, Tyler Selly, the excellent Tyler Selly, this past summer, we literally wrote out our hopes, our dreams, our goals for 365 governance, and we weighted every one of those elements of architecture and functionality, compliance settings in E3 and E5. What was available to us? What did we know we could get to in our roadmap in year 1, year 2, year 3, building out our authority documents, building out our logic, and then reflecting that in Compliance Center. What version of licensing did we recommend to the organization? And as we looked at this list that grew longer and longer, we weighted each line with a 1 through whatever ending number, ranking them in order of importance. And we were somewhat surprised that every time we came back to all we really want to do is support the end user and making deletion decisions as fast and as easy as we possibly can. So as you go through that, you undertake that conversation with sourcing and procurement, your technology colleagues. Inevitably, technology is going to be reaching out to business users. Get in on those conversations. Don't be shy, and create your own governance recommendation, perhaps in the same fashion as we did. But that thoughtful and analytical approach will help you develop out your own IG team's goals, quite frankly. And it's been a wonderful piece that has informed our program plan as we create projects for each one of the 365 applications. Gordon?
And what's really good news is that the Compliance Center and even E3 licenses, maybe not as good as E5, allows actually the disposition of records and information to be actually quite easy on the end user. Easier maybe in Teams and all these other things rather than Exchange, depending on how you do it. But the tools are there if that's the road you and the decisions you make for it to be actually really quite easy for the end user, which is great. That's what you're really hoping for. If the change management is too great and they're having to do all this other kind of stuff, people will just find ways to work around your system.
All true. All true. And in fact, in the course that we've provided, and every course following, we will offer you the alternatives as we see them. What are the possible scenarios of implementation? And then at the end of the course, we say, okay, this is how we recommend you assemble the blocks. So we hope you find that to be of tremendous value to you. And we want that feedback loop. We want to enter a feedback loop with you on what works well in the course and what doesn't. So as always, as we enjoy these final moments together, we want to remind you that Gordon and I, independently, collectively, we're never more than a phone call away. After sessions like this, I find 1 or 2 large companies will reach out and want to talk about lessons learned, experience, and McKesson is very generous in that respect, and we're happy to spend a little bit of time with you, sharing with you what went well, what's going well and what hasn't gone well. And, 365 governance, if you assemble it slightly off kilter, you've got to unpeel all the layers and reassemble it as best as you can. So we understand the delicate position that you're in. And of course, we want to share with you not only through this formal conversation path through the training materials, but also informally. Join our community of trusted advisors who, you're educating us as much as we have the privilege of educating you.
Sure, our experience, is good, and we've got experience across different industries, but there might be slight, things that we can still learn. That's right.
Exactly so. Are there any questions, Kevin? I'm going to stop for a moment and ask if there are any questions in the chat window from an Ask Me Anything perspective that maybe we could spend the last few minutes taking a look at.
Yes, Mimi, we do have some questions coming in. When you recommend not storing records in Teams, does that include SharePoint?
Gordon?
No. If you've got SharePoint either on-prem or online, I do encourage you to store records in there. I've got no issues with that. The reason why I've got issues with Teams is it's like a GUI kind of skin over SharePoint. The functionality just isn't there. For example, you have to use folders for files, and folders are horrendous. We shouldn't be using folders anymore. In full-blown SharePoint, you can just use metadata to structure your data. It makes disposition, actually searching and everything else much easier. So Teams has nice, if you use the chat function, and it's nice for discrete projects for limited periods of time, but I wouldn't be using it for long-term storage and official records.
Yeah, it's collaboration. I agree.
So transitory only environment is really what you're saying for Teams.
That's what I would recommend. However you define transitory, you can have projects that go on for a number of years. That's fine. You're going to have that ongoing collaboration, but I don't feel that it's a robust enough environment to replace the likes of a SharePoint or some other type of repository.
Agree.
Now, Mimi and Gordon, you talked about how the course will help us how to make governance a priority in M365. That's I think a key concern for many folks, really the user adoption of not only the tools, but the processes and policies. Managing that change, do you have any tips for us for organizations that may be struggling with that part of it?
Gordon, would you like to begin, or? Okay. Well, the best way to deal with it, I think, is head on, to acknowledge internally to the project team, one of the big elephants in the room is that 365 is a great equalizer between technology and RIM. But I see that as an opportunity to have the most open dialogue between the two working types than ever before. When we were implementing electronic records management softwares, 10 years ago, there was a great imbalance in terms of knowledge base. And I feel like 365 is a great equalizer, even with the end user community, because everything is available, and Microsoft is so transparent in its white papers and its research that I have more users than ever before who approach me with technical knowledge about how 365 works. I see that as a positive. because I like to be challenged and I like the constructive criticism that comes with implementations. But that is a change management piece for information governance folks. So when you're assembling your plan and you're thinking about change management, you have to think about the technical savvy, especially of the younger generations who are in the corporate workplace now. What kind of apps are they probably using on their phone? What kind of user experience are they accustomed to on their personal device? And acknowledging that even so far in your governance choices for 365, there's a subtlety there that you have to be prepared to meet. Gordon?
The only other thing I would add is, like any change management, communicate, try and show them how this is going to be an advantage and how there's that corporate responsibility. You know, people think about, these are my emails, these are my things in Teams and SharePoint. Well, actually, it's your company's. There is risk that comes with that. So you're helping mitigate that risk by deleting things at the correct time. And try and make it as easy on the end user, whether you just say, you know, a team site, as soon as it's abandoned for a year, blow it up, 3 years, whatever, so humans don't get involved. Try and make it as simple as possible for the end user so they don't freak out.
And we offer so much accessibility for the end user to the training materials, whether it's Ask Me Anything sessions like this, formal presentations, project announcements, project reminders, Yammer community posts, recorded on-demand training. We outline how to build all of that to facilitate the change.
Exactly right.
Any tips for a remote environment? I mean, it's harder to engender that sort of adoption and embracement when folks are no longer in a central location or in an environment where we see each other, have meetings together. What are your tips for success in a remote work environment?
Gordon, you're more remote than I am, sir. Do you have initial tips and tricks?
Well, you know, whereas in the past you might go to a physical meeting room and, you know, invite yourself along to somebody's team meeting, departmental team meeting, you can still invite yourself along and, you know, they'll see your face on a Zoom call, Teams, whatever it is. So you can still invite yourself to those opportunities. And actually, again, depending on the size of your organization, because you don't want to get too granular, a lot of this will be sort of impersonal. You know, if you're rolling out some kind of computer-based training or webinars, something like that, just by the nature of you probably rolling this out to so many people, it's just going to be a bit like that anyway. So I don't think remote is going to be as obstructive as it might be for some other things. You know, if you're doing a cleanup, you might want to be there to help people with their shred bins and everything else. I think this is just a different beast just because of the enormity of it.
And camera does a lot. The camera makes it such a personal experience anyway. I haven't had any challenges, you know, delivering this over, you know, training over, you know, virtually versus in person.
Very good. That is Mimi Dion and Gordon Brown. This upcoming lesson will be launched in AIIM Plus Pro. Right now, there are already a couple of dozen other lessons in all things from information management to take right now, and AIIM will be adding new lessons every month. So find out more and go to aim.org/join for more information. Mimi, Gordon, thank you so much for being a part of our program today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you so much.
All right, next up on our agenda is Mason Belcher. Mason, are you with us?
I am. Hello there.
Hello, Mason. Welcome aboard. Thank you so much. Joining us now is Mason Belcher, Account Executive at ActiveNav, talking about best practices when making the move to M365. Mason will share how Plains Midstream Canada found success using ActiveNav for their migration to Microsoft 365. So Mason, please tell us more.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much there. I will now share up my screen as well before I get going. Just wanted to make sure that everyone is able to see that. Don't want a new slide, excuse me.
Looking good, Mason.
Looking good, great to see. Go full screen. All right, perfect. All good there?
You are
So,
ready to rock, my friend. Thank you. Yes.
great. Thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Just to kind of reintroduce myself again, my name is Mason Belcher. I work with ActiveNav. We were formerly Active Navigation, for those of you who may be familiar with us by our former name. We are an organization located in the Washington, D.C. area. And like Kevin mentioned a moment ago, really looking to speak to you all today on some of the best practices on not only making that migration to M365, because obviously this is something I'll talk about. It is truly a matter of people, process, and technology, but also really just some of the real world applications we can see this being shown with. A big one being what Kevin previously mentioned there, a group named Plains Midstream Canada. Now, really just starting off with a little bit of a light note, we actually posted this the other day on our LinkedIn page at ActiveNav, but I think the story is really true here. One is just not simply migrate to Microsoft 365. I'm sure everyone here in the information management community understands that. And really with this, it's the understanding that when I say people, process, and technology, really diving into the people piece of this is something that should not just be an IT specific initiative. There's maybe some organizations where IT is enlightened enough to understand the value of these information management practices, but really from there, they need to understand the value of incorporating individuals that are in that records or information management / governance space to truly find the most success with these initiatives, because this is not something that we just want to go through a lift and shift on. We really want to understand this content. The presenters before me really made a good point that this is not a cheap solution. Even if you aren't going with the full E5, this is something that is a large investment. This is a big step for an organization, especially as we've seen, obviously the last 2 years with COVID, being a big kind of catalyst for these moves. With us majority-wise being at home these days working, we now have this ability to make each other more accessible, even if we're not sitting right next to each other like we used to be. It's that combination of these areas such as SharePoint, Teams, Exchange, that are really allowing us to be as efficient as possible while we're working from the comfort of our homes, while we're all being safe out there currently. And with this, while we're making this move, again, just harping back on that idea of, if we're going to make this investment, we really want to make the most of it going forward. We want to really ensure that we're on the best foot forward as we start this journey, and that once we land and once we finally moved all that content into M365, that it is only truly the content that we find business critical going forward, and that it's properly identified and also secured going forward. Just a little bit of background as well before I really dive in, just to provide you guys with some information on who ActiveNav is. We are defined by the Gartners and the Forresters of the world as being in what's called the file analysis market. Now, what does this mean? For ActiveNav, it means that we have the ability to not only provide organizations with a variety of data maps, whether it be to identify things like sensitive data, or more of that traditional ROT, showing things like age profile reports, duplication, but also being able to do other actions on this content as well, whether it be purging that content, doing things like mapping your content against retention schedules, or even applying retention labels, migrating that content to different repositories. Obviously today, the big focus being M365, and then from there being able to apply metadata to these documents. I think this is a huge new piece going forward, especially with M365 and these Microsoft information protection security labels. That is something I'll definitely talk about going forward, because I've seen it as a big stepping stone for creating better relationships between those in information governance and maybe IT or information security. But really to dive in now to how do we play in, or how does an organization use a file analysis solution like ActiveNav specifically for that migration process, and how can we really make sure, again, you're getting the most bang for your buck when you're making that move. It's all going to start with that preparation of content. Again, we all know here, this is day one stuff that we just don't want to do a lift and shift. We want to be able to not only minimize the volume of content we have down towards a smaller migration that's necessary going forward, but we also want to, again, once we move to that new area, have only truly business critical documents. We don't want orphan content from, say, someone who retired 8 years ago. We no longer need it. We don't want 8 different copies of a contract out there when we only need that final master copy that's been executed, or documents that haven't been accessed or modified in 10 years. Now, in the same way, we don't want to move pieces or documents that have sensitive data in there. You know, say someone accidentally saved a W-2 form. Well, there's no need to bring that into our new SharePoint environment. Let's address that. And this is really where this first stage comes in, before we've even thought about the M365 environment. And this is something that people can do either way, even if you're already within M365. You know, it's never too late to do a cleanup, is what I like to say. But really with this, it's that ability to discover and cleanse content of redundant, obsolete, and trivial information, as well as duplicates, being able to really get that visualization. I think the reality with it is, and from groups that I've talked to, is anytime we're looking at, say, over 3 to 5 terabytes of data, we like to equate roughly 1 terabyte to a million files. I just don't find it realistic to expect an individual or even a team of individuals to be able to thoroughly go through millions on millions of files manually, be able to really see and aggregate that big picture together, and then take true action on it. It's just not realistic to really ask someone to do. So let's bring in a solution like ActiveNav that can really map this out, help you understand it, and also be able to, frankly, keep the onus out of end users' hands that may not be as in tune with these policies, but also give them the ability for us to, say, simply send them a file list, say, hey, can you look through these documents? Just let me know if there's any that we can delete. Fingers crossed they say yes to the ones that they need to, and we can go out there from that and then delete it. So this is really providing a process, not only for us to review, but also to incorporate end users into it, because you know, they mentioned earlier, these end users like to think that this is their own data. The reality is that it is not. Let's go out there and really make sure they understand that. But also from there, identify and remediate that sensitive data, whether we want to purge it or further secure it. That's something that I think, again, I'll talk a lot about today, is this new capability with M365 called the MIP labels. This is a type of metadata label that, when placed on a file, can be read by M365 to start policies such as data loss prevention, access and permissions, is really valuable for further securing the documents that may be sensitive that you do want to keep. And that's a big piece that we'll talk about going forward. Obviously, a lot of you are in highly regulated industries. You have a lot of very sensitive documents out there that either are just what we call that general sensitive data, or more critical data assets to your environment. From there, it is that ability to add and configure that metadata for migration objectives. And also, again, index that content to where we can really auto-categorize it, be able to show, hey, here are your aged files that we probably don't need to move, or hey, here are the sensitive files that we probably want to secure a little bit more going forward. Now, this next slide here, this is really, again, where it comes down to, we want there to be that trust, that IT trusts the information governance professionals or information management individuals to properly prepare this content, remediate the stuff beforehand. But we on our own side need to trust these IT individuals to really help do things like prepare the SharePoint, but also communicate with them. Here's the most optimal way that we can really configure this, really map out the content to, again, we know where everything's going to be once we finally do this migration. And this includes things like creating destination libraries, uploading those term sets, applying that metadata into those columns, and really just providing an optimal way to navigate through this content as we move. I think this is a big trust process. This is something that organizations, when they go into, we can't be stubborn and say, no, I'm not going to work with them, or I'm not going to work with them. We need to value everyone's input in this, because at the end of the day, that allows for the most transparency with these projects. We don't want unnecessary aspects to be what clogs up these initiatives. And then lastly, from that, hopefully we have had that trust. We have done those pre actions there to get everything ready, and now we're actually ready to migrate that content. So again, it's that ability to map that metadata to really understand what's out there, really make sure it's going to be in those appropriate areas, align that content to those target library structures to where, again, a solution like ActiveNav can properly migrate that content and place it into where it should be based on that library structure. Configure that migration to fit those restrictions, because there are going to be issues out there. We have to be aware of that. Expect the worst is what I like to say. And if everything works out normally, then hey, we're ahead of schedule then. And then lastly, actually migrating that content and that metadata together to where at the end of the day, we are now in the M365 environment. We're on the right foot. And I think really that allows us to, if we are able to take these actions beforehand, especially in a migration, kind of hope that will be a catalyst for further communication between the records management groups and others, especially IT and InfoSec going forward. Now, this is the really interesting piece that I wanted to speak with you all about today. This is a case study on Plains Midstream Canada. We will actually provide the link to the larger case study after this at the end of one of these slides, but Plains Midstream is a oil and gas organization based in Alberta, Canada. Really with this, again, you can see this is a very large organization, roughly 1,500 employees. And, they were an organization that was going through a few different challenges. One, they were in a highly regulated industry. On top of all that, it was oil and gas in Canada, obviously one of their main industries out there. And they were having a few different issues here. One on the more external side, they were struggling a little bit to comply with some of these safety and auditory regulations that Canada placed upon these oil and gas companies. And that, at the end of the day, can really relate back to, all right, how are we able to locate and manage our data? Is everything nice and organized where when these audits do come, we have the proper documentation and proof that we are really going by the book, or are we just having that, what we like to call dark data situation where we've never done a cleanup or mapping and simply just don't know what's out there and what we can utilize for these compliance objectives. Now, on top of that, we see situations where they were also facing things like mergers and acquisitions. This is where they are saying that consolidation of content from other areas they may not be super familiar with. On top of that, like I mentioned beforehand, with any migration situation, they were most likely bringing over some content that was not only non-business critical, but also contained sensitive data. They wanted that insight into it to where they were able to actually, again, minimize the amount of data they were moving in that migration, but also make sure anything they were moving was truly the data that was in scope for use going forward. And then for the third piece of all this, they were also planning an upcoming M365 migration. Again, really great way to loop into this presentation today. But with this, they understood the need that, again, not everything they were going to move, or they were hoping that only the stuff they were going to move was truly business critical. And they realized that because of this, there probably were some things out there that they didn't need to move. So from the culmination of all these situations, what they kind of realized was we need to do this data discovery, just really understand what we have going forward for all these situations. But from there, from these maps and from these insights, we need to remediate some of this content, further secure it, take action on it. And that's exactly what they did. Some of kind of the highlights of this situation was that one, they were able to classify and identify that roughly 50% of the content that they currently had pre-migration in these unstructured repositories was what could be classified as that raw data. Now, I'll be honest, is every organization going to be liberal enough to delete half of what they have before they move? Probably not. But even if we're able to, say have 20 to 25% of the documents be classified and be purged from there, well, that's one of every 4 or 5 documents going forward that we're not going to need to migrate or really manage with this. That's going to be a big benefit once we make that migration. And then from that, they're also able to identify that sensitive data with it. Don't have the numbers around that, but again, that's a big piece of when we do these compliance objectives. We want to identify not only that typical sensitive data, things like credit cards and social security card numbers, but more of what your organization specifically would classify as those critical data assets.
That could be things like employee identification numbers or site pub numbers, whatever it may be. We want to be able to go out there, especially a solution like ActiveNav, create those rule sets to identify that content that's very specific to you all. So that's what Plains Midstream was able to go out there and do. And really kind of the last note I like with this is this was something that initially they wanted to go out and try just on their own, do that manual process. So they are a team that is very progressive. They worked hand in hand with from day one with IT, InfoSec, records and information governance. And they put out some timelines to really understand, all right, how long will this probably take? Between the team of employees, again, this is over 100 terabytes of data they were moving. This is 1,500 employees. This was no small task. Very quickly on, they realized that this was not something that they would be successful in manually. They went out there, they looked for solutions, they chose ActiveNav. And at the end of the day, when they got through this project, they were able to quantify that between all their team members, they saved roughly 9 years worth of human labor time from this. And again, when we're looking at these projects and especially looping in maybe a group like information management or governance that hasn't always had their own budget, we need to come there ready to go with ROI points. Things like storage reduction, safety, compliance are going to be very obvious ones. But it's pieces like this, by the ability to automate these processes, that absolutely has to be a part of this ROI process as well. And that was exactly what Plains Midstream was able to come through with. So again, just a great story with this. We have countless others, depending on these highly regulated industries throughout that we can really show this is something that whether you use ActiveNav or just another solution to automate this, there absolutely is going to be value. Don't just try to do it manually. Don't just try to lean on M365. It's a great solution, but I kind of like to compare it to the Apple iPhone. Anything that says it can do everything is always going to be a little bit rusty in some of these different aspects, maybe not as robust as we want it to be. It's just reality. I wish it wasn't, but I don't see that changing anytime soon, in all honesty. And then really just to wrap up again with some of these benefits, it does come in with those storage costs, those labor savings, having a more auditable process going forward, and also, again, just that visibility into these processes throughout any action they take. And really just to wrap up again, what I'm showing you all here today, especially with this slide, is if you were to run the full gambit of capabilities with ActiveNav, here's what it would look like. And obviously not everyone's going to need to do all this. I mentioned earlier, maybe you've already migrated in 365, so you don't need the migration piece. But I think for any organization, it is that ability to do that data discovery, do the data cleansing, do the data modeling to really help identify with your policies. That's going to be very valuable for an organization. And just to cap off, going with those MIP labels, those sensitivity labels that can help drive things like DLP and access and permissions. What ActiveNav is able to go out there and do is apply this metadata and inject it directly into these files. When it's there, it can be read by M365 and actually drive that policy through it. And also probably be more scalable with it too, to be honest with you. One story we have, and we don't have an attachment here currently, but I will provide a link to our website, is we were actually able to go in there and label over 4 million files over 48 hours with an organization over the last month or so with these sensitivity labels. And this is, again, something where a solution like ActiveNav can bring together all these groups, whether it be IT, records, InfoSec, legal, to drive this policy. And again, I love this line here that you cannot protect what you don't know you have. I think that speaks to everyone that deals with information on a day-to-day basis. And really, again, just to wrap up here is a link to the Plains Midstream Canada case study, as well as an ebook that we have. And if you actually go on the ActiveNav website at activenav.com, we do have an M365 specific page that covers more of this information, more case studies, if anyone is interested in looking further. So that was all I had today. If you do want to reach out to me personally, here's my email address. Always happy to have these conversations. But again, thank you all for the time today. And now I will hand it back off to Kevin.
Thanks, Mason. Yes, we do have a couple questions coming in, and we only have a short time, but I did want to get to one from Sarah here. She says, my organization is in the initial stages of migrating from file share to M365, file and rot cleanup. After creating a new folder taxonomy, our IT would like the end users to move content manually to new folders and then migrate to 365. Any tips on how to advocate for a tool like ActiveNav rather than manual migration? Sarah says, we're a government organization, so cost and lengthy procurement processes are a main obstacle for tools like ActiveNav.
Completely understand that, especially in government, the cost is always going to be a piece of this, but I think it's some of what I saw beforehand. It's really on these ROI points here when you're talking to maybe IT of, look, if we're able to minimize the content down, this is really going to help us for storage and efficiency going forward. It's just a reality with end users that they're not always going to be the best with these policies, and especially for security's sake, I think that's a thing we can talk about, as well as the automation. If we can bring in a solution like ActiveNav, that instead of just asking people to go do this all themselves, that we're able to have it as simple as providing them with an Excel sheet or a CSV with, hey, here's a file list. Can you go through this and tell me which ones you want to keep? That saves a lot of time in their day, and also makes it easier for people that really understand these policies and these practices to go out there and execute. So that's really a piece of it. And again, what I mentioned earlier too, even if you don't maybe have the budget or the time to go through all these activities, something as simple as data mapping just to get these insights is a great first step.
That is Mason Belcher, Account Executive at ActiveNav. Mason, thank you so much for being part of our event today.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kevin.
All right, moving right along, let's bring up our next presenter for this afternoon, Rakesh Chincheri. Rakesh, are you with us?
Yes, hi, Kevin. Yes. Good afternoon,
Hello.
everyone.
It's our pleasure to meet you and speak with you today. Welcoming today, Rakesh Chincheri. Rakesh is the CTO of Profintech, and we'll be talking about getting the most out of M365 while migrating from a legacy ECM. And we'll be discussing how customers are able to make the most of the Microsoft 365 platform from day one with Profintech. Tell us more, Rakesh.
Yes, so continuing on the theme of migration, we already heard Mason talk about some of the best practices for migration. I thought I'll take a slightly different view on this one and look more of what you can actually get out of M365, especially M365 is such a versatile platform with a lot of new features being added. And when you move from a legacy ECM platform like the likes of IBM FileNet or Documentum or so on, they are very feature rich. And most of organizations wonder, can you do all of those things in M365 or not? And what is needed when you actually do such kind of a transformation onto M365? So a few things to look at. So the first would be, what are the things to consider when you're moving out of a legacy platform? So the first one obviously is cost. Most people are worried about the cost of having two platforms. A lot of them already have an M365 license. So can you just make use of that? Some of the legacy platforms are quite expensive, the infrastructure, the licensing, the support, and so on. So can you consolidate all of that onto a single platform? So there might be advantage in that. What other things can you look at? Important thing is productivity. A lot of the time when we talk to customers, they always complain about many of the systems where the search is extremely slow. They cannot get to a content. They are finding things, but there are a lot of duplicates. And so that does have a massive impact on productivity. So any new system they're moving on to needs to improve the productivity for users. And next is the risk aspect of it. There's a lot of sensitive content in the organization, which needs to be protected. So can a new platform do that? Then once the risk is taken care of, the employee well-being is an extremely important part of it, because an employee is a core part of any organization, and any systems that are available needs to be available for the employees to balance that productivity. And last is the various business processes. When you use some of these ECM platforms, alongside this data, there's a lot of business processes that help, that are business critical. So it's important that when you make this move onto a newer platform like M365, those processes work as it does today, or maybe better. So that right integration needs to be available, or ability to modernize. So when you look at M365, what are the things that are really useful? Now, in order to succeed, there are a few things you need to focus on prior to migration, during, and after. So the first is insights. So understanding the DNA of your content is extremely useful to make all the right decisions on where the data should go. Now, M365, in the past, people would just think about SharePoint, but it's a lot more than just that. There are lots of workloads within there which you need to consider when you're moving the data. So understanding what current data does, how it is spread across the organization, how it is used, what type of data, the sensitivity nature of data, the risk element of it, understanding all of that will help you decide what to do. And we also heard in the previous talk about the rot detection and the cleanup of data. And that is an extremely useful thing to do this. So one of the customers we recently worked with, they had over 100 terabytes of data. This was a life sciences organization here in Europe. And their challenge was there was a lot of data being produced by the scientists from various devices. But in addition to that, there was data from various departments like HR and finance were also storing data. So 100 terabytes is a lot of data, well over 100 million documents. And to identify which data needs to be retained, which needs to be assessed from a risk point of view, because HR had some data which had GDPR implications. So they had to be either deleted or secured properly, have the right label set on them. So the insights does really help. And the advantage is the various solutions within M365, like even having Power BI, helps you to take these insights and then share it with the right department. So the HR data, the reports of that is only viewed by HR and not anyone else. So that way you have the right security even for sharing those insights. The next is information architecture, because it's very important to understand where the data goes, how it is managed. And IA consists of lots of things, everything from defining your site structures, the kind of templates you need, the content types, your taxonomy, the security. There are lots of things that come together to form the right information architecture. So it's not about just taking data and just dumping, but it's making sure it is done in the right way. Now, especially if you look at systems like IBM FileNet or OpenText eDocs, a lot of them don't have the concepts of folders or in any other structure. All the data is just there within the system, and the data is driven through metadata and search. So when you move into a system like SharePoint and Teams and so on, it's essential that you identify how this structure is set up to make the best use of it. And also having the teams first approach will help with a better collaboration. So one of the law firms we worked with, for them, it was important that when they moved out of iManage, that they were able to create all the active cases in a way where the team could actually collaborate on those matters. So we took that teams first approach and then made sure that those active matters were dealt separately, had a different rules for the information architecture, the teams of provision, and the content was migrated there. And all the rest of the data was moved into different locations, different sites, which didn't need to be Teams enabled. Once the information architecture in place, the compliance and governance part of M365 is quite useful. The first is around the risk and liability, how to manage that. There is a lot of capability from the compliance center with MIP labels, with your retention labels and so on. So one of the local council in UK, they had millions of documents on a file share, and their challenge was that they needed to categorize these documents and apply the right retention labels in M365. But they needed to move this data into different sites in M365 based on the categorization. So Once the data is in M365, of course, there is a lot of functionality there to do some of the auto classification and the auto labeling. But the customer needed to know this upfront. So we ran it through our AI engine. Obviously, the syntax APIs weren't available for the content understanding models and so on. So we were able to run the classification using an AI engine and categorize this data and apply the retention labels on the fly while this migration was happening. So the data would end up in the right site, in the right library, have the right content type, the right metadata, and also the right retention labels. Similarly, yet another organization, DLF, which is one of the largest construction company in Asia, they had a similar requirement when moving out of IBM FileNet, but their requirement was that the data had to be shared externally and they needed to protect that data. So the MIP labels were the chosen labels that they went for. But the challenge they had was they needed to retain all of the key metadata from FileNet, including those modified date, the created date, the users, and all of that information, along with applying this the sensitivity labels, which would encrypt some of the documents which get shared externally. So again, that was done through the migration engine that we use through the Preventec solutions, so that everything could be assessed and then applied as part of migration. Then enrichment of data is quite key, because when you take data from any system, you really want to make sure that it's searchable, it can be categorized, the metadata can be enriched, so you can actually use the data in a much better fashion. And this also adds towards the knowledge management side of it. It helps towards that, having things structured into the right taxonomy. And you can also use some of the things that M365 provides now as part of Viva. So Viva has Microsoft Topics, which can go through all of this content. It can create those topics, and the knowledge managers can then curate some of these topics and bring that knowledge up to all of the users through your popular applications that you use. So once the content enrichment is looked at, you can then look at application modernization, because this is quite key for any of the business processes. So one of the customers, so this is a Department for Education in UK, they had data in Meridio. And from Meridio, when they wanted to move all of the data, there was a lot of case management data. So the challenge was, how do you move all the case management, but at the same time get all the data into SharePoint, and they need to be linked. So we migrated the data all into SharePoint, took those links, created those cases in Dynamics, and then linked them together. So they were able to actually use this application with the data from day one. And this is also true for yet another customer we are working, it's a large US automotive customer. They were doing a lot of business processes in IBM FileNet, which is quite strong with these BPM solutions. And their challenge was to get all of the various ingestion, the case management, and the various flows into an M365 environment. And they did think about, is that the right choice or not? But with the way Power Platform and the Azure services have evolved, it is not possible that you can actually rebuild a lot of this application. You can modernize, and at the same time, you can integrate with some of the legacy apps that are in place. So all those functionality is available. And these are things you need to think about even before you actually move. And last, the employee experience side of things, because you want to be sure that, especially with the pandemic going on and a lot of remote working happening, that everybody, all the employees, there's a good balance of productivity and well-being. And solutions from Viva like Insights give you that kind of insights for both the users as well as the managers to ensure that the right balance is there. So once we have seen how M365 can really help. Now, why are we talking about this? So Preventec has been specializing in this intelligent content management and cloud office solution for quite some time. We specialize in moving from non-Microsoft solutions, the legacy ECM platforms, onto M365, and we work with customers around the globe. Our solutions are recognized by Gartner and Forrester, and we are also a member of the Microsoft Content Services Partner Program. So if you need to know more about the solutions that we use to help organizations make the transition from some of the legacy ECM platforms to M365, there are links here to visit the website, which will give you more information. Similarly, there's an ebook that you can download with a lot of information on how to achieve a full fidelity migration from most legacy ECM platforms. And there are some case studies. So Avalon Bay is one of the customers who moved from IBM FileNet, and as part of that, they were able to save 100 grand annually and a lot of storage as part of that migration. So I would like to turn this over back to Kevin, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to answer that.
Thank you, Rakesh. That's Rakesh Chencheri. Now, Rakesh, we have some questions coming in from the audience. Stephen Young asks, he says, maybe this is for another session, but a lot of highly regulated organizations have rather lengthy retention timeframes. How can we set up the archive portion of the information lifecycle in Microsoft 365? In other words, a record must be retained for 20 years and no recall is needed after a 5-year time frame, and it needs to go to a static low resource repository until year 20. Can you tell us how we might achieve that?
So I think using some of the retention labels does have a lot of this functionality to retain and then trigger off a disposition review. So some of those things might be useful. And I'm sure maybe in the next session when Roberto speaks, he probably would have a lot more to talk around this. But yes, so using the retention labels, you should be able to achieve some of this.
Now, a couple of our presenters have presented maybe differing philosophies. In other words, moving everything into M365 or not. What are the advantages of moving all my enterprise content into Microsoft 365?
Okay, so there are definitely a lot of advantages. One is having all the data in M365 means your search works great. So it's a central repository in a sense. And not just from a search point of view, but also to have the compliance part of it work across the entire workloads is quite a useful thing. Having in multiple repositories means you need a solution that will then work across these repositories. So there is some advantage in moving everything into M365.
Now, it's all about process and getting the job done more efficiently, more innovatively. Can you build complex applications and workflow in Microsoft 365? And if so, can you give us an example and what they did and how we can do it too?
Yeah, so in the past, it used to be just SharePoint. It used to be customization of SharePoint. But over the last few years, there has been a lot of things that have been added to this, right from creating custom SPFX to customize SharePoint itself, or the whole Power Platform has evolved into a strong platform to build applications using Power Apps and Power Automate and so on. And in cases where that might not be sufficient, or if there are some licensing concerns, you can move on to Azure and have services like the App Service or Azure Functions or Logic Apps. So there's a lot of choices here that will help you to modernize and recreate a lot of those applications.
Do I need to think about every change from the start, from day one, or can we progressively start using Microsoft 365 over time?
So you don't have to. It's good if you have the leisure to actually look at it from a holistic point of view. It'll help you. But a lot of the time, customers are at a different level of maturity. So they might start with just OneDrive and SharePoint or just Exchange, and then start from there. And over time, start building upon things and introduce the compliance side of things and so on. So yeah, you can start with one and gradually evolve into using the rest of M365.
Very good. All right. Well, that is Rakesh Chencheri, CTO from Provintech. Rakesh, thank you so much for being a part of our event today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very good. Well, all right. Moving along to last but not least, our final presenter of the day, Roberto Iglesias. Roberto, are you with us?
I am
Hello.
making sure you can hear me, Kevin.
Hello, Roberto. I can hear you and see you. Very good. Thank you so much. Let me give you a proper introduction. We are here to welcome Roberto Iglesias from Microsoft. He is a principal product manager in records management and information governance for Microsoft 365 compliance. Roberto is here to talk a little bit about Microsoft, where we're going, where we are now, and where we're going in the future with records management and information governance. Roberto, tell us more.
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go ahead and share my screen as well. And hopefully that will make it easier for everybody to follow along. I'll do that right away. And so first of all, thank you for having me. Super excited to be here. Love hanging out with all of the great people of AIIM. And so appreciate you making this space. Let me know if you can see my presentation right now. I want to make sure that you are seeing the title.
Yes, we can,
screen.
Roberto. You are looking good.
Perfect. All right. Just triple checking, making sure. I won't make any Zoom jokes then. All right. So, super excited to be here and be sharing with all of you. As Kevin mentioned, for those that may not know me, I'm Roberto Iglesias, and I'm accountable along with my team I lead the team that delivers the engineering of the information governance and records management of Microsoft 365. So I wasn't able to join for the whole event, but I hope there's been nothing but great things shared before. But for any of the bad ones, you can blame me. And we can, if you have any questions, I love to hear, what are your questions, your concerns. So please do, send those in the Q&A in the chat, and I'll try to, leave as much time as I can for that at the end. What I thought I would do for today, as Kevin mentioned, was to go through a bit of a recap. I'm in kind of recap mode in January. I think as many of us are looking back at what 2021 was and looking forward to what we want to do in 2022. So I want to do a little bit of a recap of what was new in 2021 and share with you some of the things that we can already tell you that are going to be coming in the next year, and in this year, I guess, in the next few months. And we still have a lot more planned, but that we can't yet share. But hopefully with this, that'll give you a little bit of an idea of where we are investing, where is the kind of things that we're going to be working on. So with that, it'll be a quick kind of super high level overview. I'll have resources at the end, which you will be able to reference. But of course, if you have more questions, I'll be able to share more details on where you could go find some of those answers or when we can provide more information. So without making this any longer, let's jump right into what's new. So recapping a little bit of what we shipped and what was new in the product in 2021. As you know, in 2020, we made, that was kind of a year for solidifying our reinvestment into information governance and records management. We launched our records management solution. So 2021 was a lot about advancing that same investment. And so first, right off the bat, that I wanted to acknowledge we spent a ton of time working on, and it is super critical and important to us, is the reliability and scalability of our product. And so we spent a lot of time working on making sure that the product is scaling to the growth that thankfully we've received over the last couple of years, but also that it becomes much more predictable and that it is really reliable for all of you to use. We care deeply about this. So last year we did a big effort to revamp our retention service in SharePoint and OneDrive, and made sure that that was much more reliable, that it was scaling to all the growth that we were getting. And we even added some special scalability improvements for those large tenants that many of you may have, which might have never turned on a policy or used information governance or records management before, and now needed to do very big jobs, like for example, deleting all your emails that you've collected over the years. And so we've done a lot of improvements there, and we have, we will continue to invest there. But wanted to start with reliability, as for us, it is the number one thing. Before introducing new features, we want to make sure the product is working the best it can for all of you. Now, the second one that I'll highlight is obviously our coverage around the different areas where you can apply retention and you can manage the content and govern that content. And so during 2021, we increased our footprint in Teams by supporting private channels and the announced Teams Connect channels, right? Also known as shared channels, so that they will support retention policies to retain or delete messages. We also added, which is in public preview right now, will be going generally available very soon, the support for Yammer messages. So you can preserve those community or private messages in Yammer, or be able to delete them appropriately according to your policies. And then last but not least, if you're not familiar with our third-party data connectors, we spent a lot of time, and we've exponentially increased the rate at which we're adding new third-party data connectors to our catalog, so that you can bring in data from other sources into 365 for the purposes of compliance management, right? Everything around governance, protection, e-discovery, everything. And so now we have over 70 connectors in that catalog that you're able to use and deploy right from the Compliance Center in conjunction with some of our partners that we're working on that connectors framework. Then let's move on to a little bit of, there you go. One of our big announcements last year, at beginning of the year, was our multi-stage disposition review. As you well know, we have the ability to trigger a disposition review when a retention label expires, and make sure that a human has the chance to sign off on a disposition or deletion of content. And so this used to be a one-stage process. We've rolled out an update that makes it a multiple stages, where you can have multiple levels of approvals. With that, we also released an improved reviewer experience that makes sure that what you're seeing is tailored to what's assigned to you only, and records managers are the ones that get the cross view of everything and where it's at. And we added a bunch of additional administrative features that are very useful. We made sure that every single action taken in this disposition review had a very detailed audit trail that you can find in the Microsoft 365 Unified Audit Log. We also allowed you the way to be able to customize the reviewer email that your end users will be receiving, as well as being able to optimize that experience in who are the people, those records managers that could see all the items that were pending. So many of those improvements that shipped to this disposition review in the year of 2021 last year. Next up, a big area for us in 2021 was also automatic labeling. So as you well know, we obviously have talked many times about how it's impossible to catch up with the amount of information that's being generated nowadays, especially in the last couple of years, as we've all moved to work a lot more digitally. And so automatic labeling is a key investment, because we know this is the #1 problem for our customers in how they can classify that information, make sure that that's accurate. So we're investing heavily on it. We want to be the best at classification. And so we've added a bunch of new improvements there. First of all, we added support for SharePoint syntax to automatically, as it processes some of those documents and forms that you can create, that you will also be able to apply a retention label to them. So whether you're using their machine teaching document understanding models, or you're using the forms processing for more semi-structured content, you can also auto-apply a retention label at that time. And then we also added support to be able to automatically label based on the sensitivity label. So if you are just getting started with automatic labeling and you have been using sensitivity labels from our information protection product, then you will be able to use that as a criteria to auto apply the label, the retention label that should be on it. So if all your confidential documents should follow, or highly confidential documents should be of the same retention category, you would be able to do that. That may not apply to everyone, but we did have some customers that really could benefit that, especially as a first step in getting started. And then last but definitely not least, we've continued our investment on trainable classifiers, our machine learning AI-based classification that continues to get better. We shipped 9 new built-in trainable classifiers in the product so that you don't have to even train your own. We continue to make the training experience better so that you can train those that are custom to your organization. But we do have the ability of now having these built-in trainable classifiers detect things like legal agreements, finance documents, healthcare information, all of that beyond all the different types of auto labeling that we already had. I'll go through a couple more, and then I see there's a couple of questions on the Q&A and the chat that I'll come back to in one moment. Towards the end of 2021, one of our biggest announcements of the year was that we introduced adaptive policy scopes, which are right now in public preview. Adaptive policy scopes, we're super excited about it. We have a couple of webinars outside that you can go look at, and we'll have the links for them. We also have another webinar going on tomorrow that you may be able to attend if you want to do this in SharePoint. But basically what adaptive policy scopes let you do is do a set and forget retention policy or labeling policy, where you don't have to manage who or what is in or out of scope all the time. What we do is you provide us with the criteria of who should be covered for a certain policy or where should a certain label be published, and it will automatically keep that list up to date. So do you want to target a policy for only your leadership or only your marketing team? And that's based on some Active Directory attributes, for example. Then we will automatically add and remove people into that policy as the people join, leave, or even change shops within the company. So those automatic updates are super powerful. We're seeing a lot of customers take advantage of this already, and we will be going generally available soon, and look forward to all of you trying this out if you haven't already. A couple of great advantages that we shipped with this is that this removes the policy limit that some of you may have experienced in the past when you're explicitly including or excluding content. We've always been able to cover every location of a certain type, like saying every SharePoint site in your tenant. But if you try to choose only a few SharePoint sites, for example, then you may be facing some limits on how many you could specify per policy. By using an adaptive policy scope, you will not have this limit, and you will be able to include a lot more or all of the locations that you have available in that. And then last but definitely not least is the new policy lookup tool that we added to both information governance and records management. This lets you come in and enter a SharePoint site or a mailbox and automatically get the list of all the policies or label policies, retention policies or label policies that are applied in there. So you can better understand what are the policies that some content may be governed to. So we think this will greatly help you on managing all of your policies. And then the last one that is actually, these changes are rolling out right now, should be in every tenant already, if not by the end of this week and next, you'll see them on all the commercial ones. They'll be coming in a little bit longer for our GCC, our government customers. We've rolled out a bunch of improvements to make sure that you can change and configure how our Microsoft 365 records management works for your organization. So we've added some tenant settings that you're able to configure. The first one is about making sure that the metadata of documents is locked, as well as the content of the document. So if you're using metadata on SharePoint and OneDrive, and you want to make sure that when a record is locked, that you're not able to change its metadata, you will be able to have a simple toggle to turn this behavior on and off for your whole tenant. The second one is we've gotten some feedback from customers that there are a few organizations that are not yet ready for the concept of locking and unlocking records. You may be coming from a legacy ECM system, or you're still training your organization around how to use locking and unlocking of records. And so for that, we've added a simple way for you to turn off the ability to unlock records and always treat the records as locked, so that you can do that meanwhile your organization is ready to be able to use this. And then finally, the last one we have started to roll out. That one will take a little bit longer, and it's a slow process of rolling it out. Is the configuration so that you can determine for retention labels that are not records, if when a user tries to delete an item, but let's say the retention label is configured to retain this, you will be able to configure whether you want to throw an error and not let the user delete, or you want to let the user feel they deleted it, remove it from their view, and just preserve it behind the scenes in the appropriate preservation hold library, which is where we keep all of this information. And so this will let you have some of these configurability, and we think this will go a really long way. These have been highly requested by a lot of records managers on being able to configure exactly how it should work for your organization. Now, before we go into what's new, I'm going to do a quick check on the chat and the Q&A so that we can answer a couple of these questions. Let's see.
Yeah, Roberto, we do have a number of questions coming in, as you can see here in both the chat and the question and answer period. So let's find some time to see if we can't get through some of those as well.
Okay, there's a bunch of them coming in. Yeah, I see. So maybe more than I can cover in a quick minute. So let's do that, Kevin. Maybe I'll finish with sharing some of the what's coming next, and then we can dedicate a bunch of time for the for the Q&A. So super quick, high-level overview of what's coming next. Some of the things that you may see in your tenant coming soon. First one is one we're very excited because we believe this is a new disruptive feature in the world of preservation and information governance and records management. And this is about rethinking how we preserve content for modern collaboration. Up until today, we've always said if something was linked from a message, from an email, or from a Teams message, that was kind of out of scope, right? Whenever we went to discover it, we said, yeah, we can't really follow links. So we only look at what was that email, right? In an old times, we may have an attachment, but that was it. If it wasn't attached, it was a link, it was just embedded in the text, we would ignore that and we would not be able to do anything about it. Well, we are starting to break that barrier. And in this quarter, we're going to be shipping first in public preview, and we'll continue to enhance it throughout the year. What we're calling the ability to preserve a file that was shared as a cloud attachment. You may be familiar with cloud attachments first introduced in email, where you would attach a document and it would really just send you a link to SharePoint or OneDrive. This is the behavior that is the only behavior available in Teams, where it will always show you the link to the item, and the item has been uploaded either to OneDrive or SharePoint. And so what we're going to be able to do if you deploy one of these policies is follow that link and copy that exact version that was shared in that moment as part of that message, and apply a retention label of your choosing to it. So that then when you're doing e-discovery of content, you're able to retrieve the exact version that was sent at that time. And so we think as we're looking at modern collaboration, these are some of the abilities that we'll be able to do to follow all of those different links in whether it's email messages or Teams messages. So very excited for everybody to get to try this, especially we know our financial services customers have been asking for this and really looking forward to it. The next one is around customizing your workflows for records. And so we have a bunch of changes that are coming in to allow you to really configure and customize your disposition and your records processes. The first one is the ability to set a retention label that will declare items as a record to be able to start unlocked. And so for those of you that are doing automatic classification and auto labeling across the tenant, we've heard your feedback that sometimes the document that's being auto classified is not yet ready to be locked, right? It may not be in a final stage, ready to be declared as a record. And so this way you can auto label and then use the lock to essentially create a manual record declaration moment and make sure that that content at that point declares its first version of a record. The second one that will be very, very impactful, especially for partners and all of those that have more complex processes, is we're going to introduce a new action at the end of a retention label period to trigger a Power Automate flow. So for each one of those documents that reach that expiration, you will be able to trigger a flow, and then we'll be able to have either your own custom disposition process or move that document to another repository for archival into a different location within your tenant. Any of those kind of scenarios you will be able to do. And that, will likely, a couple of the things we'll ship there will also be the ability to relabel the item. And so with that, and our last update, which is we're introducing a new action at the end of the retention label period to apply another label, essentially relabel the item. This will let you make sure that you can do multiple stages of retention. So if your processes and your standards in your organization say that, for example, there's a record category that should be preserved for 5 years as a record, and then maybe another 3-year, but no longer as a record, or with a different type of restrictions, you will be able to do that by essentially changing the label at the end of the period automatically. And so we think all of this will really help you customize the Microsoft 365 Records Management solution to how your organization needs it. Our next announcement that we will have this year is around graph APIs. And so I know that this group, especially there, we've heard from some of our great partners throughout the day. A lot of our partners have been asking for us to ship a records management API that you're able to leverage, and even your own IT organization can automate a lot of these processes, so that you don't have to use PowerShell, you don't have to use one specific, user credentials. And so we are working, this will be several releases of this. We will start with an early release here in the first quarter that will be focused on managing of labels and triggering of events. And then we'll continue to add some of the other operations like disposition review and all of those. And so this will really help you customize. If you have some specific processes that you need to do, you will be able to automate using our Graph API. Next, we will continue to improve around our automatic labeling. And so we have about 30 built-in trainable classifiers being developed right now and being validated so that we can release those. A lot more categories. So we really want to have a really rich set of trainable classifiers that would represent all the different types of information that are common to different organizations, so that you can leverage those. And we're working really hard on making sure that our all of the actions the system takes when it automatically labels content, when it automatically takes actions, are part of the unified audit log. And so we're doing a big effort to true up all of those activities and make sure that they all have their corresponding activity in the audit log. And when we do, that will have the great side effect of content from Exchange will start to show up in the Content Explorer. We know that that's today a part that some of you have been asking for. Do you want to see more of that Exchange content in the audit log, in the audit log, and therefore in Content Explorer, so that you can understand where that Exchange content has been labeled? And so a lot of that coming in the next few months and later into this year. And then we also will continue to work on consistency, and we want to make sure that what you are, what we are typically doing in one area of Microsoft 365, we do in others, and we're constantly looking for things to fine tune. So a few things that we're going to do for this is, first of all, we're changing how files are preserved into the preservation hold library. Today, when a file gets preserved there, we split the file into what we call it exploding its versions, right? Each version becomes its own file, which can be a little bit hard to handle. And it changes a little bit how you can discover those. So we're going to introduce better consistency for discovery and make sure that the files preserved to the preservation whole library as a whole stack of versions. And so it will work and it will be discovered just like it is in the library before it was deleted. Additionally, we've heard feedback that the fact that we retain and delete everything within SharePoint sites can really be a pain when you're talking about things like the branding elements, your logo of the site, things that don't change often, but you want to be able to delete all the other documents, but not necessarily get rid of the items in those system libraries, like the pages libraries or those elements that are from the branding of the site. So we're working right now, and the details will be coming later on making sure that files in the system libraries, we still preserve them so that there's no hole in making sure that everything is preserved within the site. We'll make sure that's still the case, but we won't actually automatically go and delete certain files in certain libraries, so that you can make sure that your branding elements or your system files are not getting deleted. And then last one, we've gotten a lot of feedback that the preservation whole library can confuse sometimes end users if they find it. and they can see some of the content. So we are working to make the preservation hold library a lot more hidden from end users, make sure that that is not something that they can constantly be looking at or that they realize when has been created. So some of those improvements coming along. And then last but not least, I started with reliability. I'll finish with reliability to tell you we're still want to make sure that the product continues to get better. And so we will have more improvements coming in. We're working really hard, just like we did with SharePoint on OneDrive, now on the Exchange service that has been there for a while. So with the amazing growth we've had, it needs to catch up a little bit. And we know that policy distribution, creating a policy, sometimes can have some failures, and you may not be able to see or immediately know that there was a failure. And so we're working both on the reliability of that process, and we've already done a ton of improvement there, but we'll continue to do it throughout the year to make sure that the policy gets distributed as reliably as possible. And then when there are issues that need you to resolve them, that we're making sure that we're highlighting those for you, that it's very easy for you to know that something happened. And I'll finish and leave this while we do the Q&A so that everybody can look at. This is our set of resources. So if you're looking for the webinars that I have mentioned, that's your aka.ms link, our deployment guide, our blog, our documentation. We're constantly working on our documentation. We will be releasing more videos throughout this year. Really encourage you all to go look through these resources. And I'll leave them up for maybe a second, Kevin, while we look through some of the questions.
Thank you, Roberto. Yes, we do have a number of questions coming in from the audience. And so let's try to get to a few of these before we run out of time today. The first comes from Eric Stout. Eric's with Maine State Government. And if I'm getting his question right, it's really, he's asking, is there any advice you could give about a hybrid environment where a small portion of capstone officials are on G5, but everyone else is on G3, the cheaper license?
Yeah, it's a great question. Licensing always comes up, and of course, that's a tough one, because what I could really say is that it obviously it's much easier. I realize that there's a big cost implication, but it is much better when you can make sure that you have everybody on the G5 level or E5 level of your enterprise, because that will greatly improve your access to all these features. In the case of this, I'll just say anything records management is basically going to require you to be in that E5 level. So all those customers, all of the users that would be accessing things where you're going to need to do auto labeling, declare records, or even have these great adaptive policy scopes that I mentioned to scope the policy automatically to them, that's going to require your G5 level. So I definitely would recommend for a kind of 100% G5 versus a hybrid. But if you do have to do a split, then making sure that you're scoping the appropriate audience by using adaptive scopes to scope to that 2% that will have the G5, and you're able to that way very easily manage which policies are available to them. It's probably the place that I could recommend a little more.
This question coming in from Sarah. Sarah says, Roberto, it would be great if we could apply more than one retention policy to team chats. Unfortunately, not all chats within one thread are transitory or need the same retention. What do you have to say about that? Will that be coming?
Yeah, actually, yes. Stay tuned is all I can say about that. So you can have multiple policies, right? But we resolve which policy applies using our retention principles of which one should win over which, right? And by the way, if you haven't looked at it, a plug for our amazing documentation team. They create a great workflow that walks you through which one will win in a case of multiple policies. So check that out in our documentation. But yes, stay tuned around this. We are thinking about it. We've heard customers ask us about, hey, there's one particular conversation within a channel that I need to treat differently. Now you can, if you're just talking about different people or different teams, that's where adaptive scopes will help, because you can make sure that some people in the org have one policy, other people in the org have a different policy, right? Now, if within the same channel or within the same conversation, that's where we have some announcements coming, probably towards the end of the year, beginning of next. It's a big work we're doing, but stay tuned.
Mm-hmm. All right, Roberto, we are running long. Teresa is going to yank us both out of here, but one last question. Does Microsoft have anything in their roadmap to improve the front end capture methods of ingest? In other words, scanning paper into repositories without the need for additional add-ons, or does something exist that I'm not aware of?
Yes, I know this is something that definitely our Microsoft SharePoint team, especially the content management team and the team that's working on Microsoft Viva, are thinking about a lot. So I'd say yes, definitely, go check out all the great stuff that Viva has released. That's probably what will, get you closer to what you're looking for. And then, of course, all the great partner solutions that you mentioned.
All right, very good. Well, we have other questions here. We will be passing your questions along to Roberto. Thank you, Jason, Sarah, Crystal, all the others that have submitted questions for this conversation here. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank Roberto Iglesias for being with us from Microsoft. Roberto, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's great to be here.
All right, with that, I would like to turn it back over to Teresa to help us close out this afternoon.
This has just been an amazing day, and I've been learning so much with everything that I've been listening to. And Kevin, I know you and I talked about this before we went into this. I want to give you an opportunity, since you've been frontline talking with every one of our presenters, if you can just offer some of your closing thoughts or just a summary on some of the things that we've been hearing today, and just looking for your feedback on that.
Well, as I mentioned at the start, this is an important conversation at an important time with Microsoft 365 becoming basically ubiquitous in business today. The adoption has skyrocketed. As a result, organizations are looking to understand how far the 365 platform will take them, especially in terms of information governance and records management. Peggy certainly talked about some of AIIM's most recent research and some of the findings that we have uncovered in speaking with AIIM member organizations, real world practitioners, looking for flexible protection options and ways to really keep up with the pace of development in 365, as we've seen here. Jordan Uderhagen, I thought, gave us a great summary of things like sensitivity labels and case of closure records, and really demoing some of the out-of-box capabilities that are possible, that are within the 365 environment, as perhaps opposed to third-party add-on solutions. Jeff Melnick also took that discussion a bit further with a glimpse under the hood of Teams, how data is stored within Teams, except when they're not, as he mentioned, and some of the protections that we can put into place within the environment against cyber attacks, and really how we can ensure consistent governance and security across the M365 apps that underpin Teams. I enjoyed our conversation with Sean Achampong from Toomey. Great conversation about user adoption versus governance in Teams and Microsoft 365. Sean did a great job at explaining some of the stages to consider and where we can move forward with a plan for adoption. And I really enjoyed his perspective, and which was a bit, perhaps he called it controversial. I just think it was just a different way of looking at things, advocating to move everything now and then clean up things later within the 365 environment, leveraging again the tools within 365 to do that. And it was great to hear about some of the cool Microsoft apps that we might not be considering that we should investigate and consider. I thought that was very helpful. Of course, Mimi, Dion, and Gordon Brown, their summary, getting a sneak peek into their upcoming training lesson for AIIM Plus. And I will remind everyone that AIIM Plus Pro is awesome. There are some great training lessons on board already, more coming on board, like the one that we discussed with Mimi and Gordon. Some of the takeaways there were how to dive into the compliance center a bit more, the governance module, really maximizing the out-of-the-box capabilities, and some of the differences between E3 and E5 that's come up over the course of today. Mason Belcher from ActiveNav, best practices when making the move to 365. I always love hearing how real-world organizations address the challenges and adopt the advantages. Certainly, we heard about Midstream Canada and how they found success. Interesting to find Mason's research, or ActiveNav's research, with Midstream Canada, that 50% of their file analysis, 50% of their information turned out to be redundant, obsolete, or trivial. I love seeing those real-world stats. Experts tell us that it can be up to 80%. Here we find 50% in the real world. So, but Mason advocated perhaps a little different philosophy than Sean did, using file analysis to prepare for a lift and shift, but a lift and shift of only the most critical and thoughtful movement of data across over to 365. Rakesh Chencheri from Proventech, also talking about migrating away from a legacy ECM, discussing how their customers were able to do that and make the most of 365 right away. Things to consider when moving from a legacy system: cost, of course, risk, but also things like employee well-being and experience, and how to gain real insights from that activity, and do maybe things like data enrichment and modernization of apps along the way. And of course, we wish we had more time with Roberto Iglesias, talking about Microsoft, where we're going in 2022. A great recap of some of the developments in 2021 with RM solutions and reliability and scalability being at the top there. Areas where you can apply retention, extending into Teams and Yammer and third-party data connectors, all of that. And then what's coming in 2022 with automatic labeling and customized workflow, all super valuable as we map our plans for 2022 and beyond with Microsoft 365. So Teresa, another great session today. And I have all kinds of notes, Peggy, on my #2 legal pad and #2 pencil here.
And just wanted to give a shout out for the podcast work that Kevin does here at AIIM, AIIM.org/podcast, to listen to all the cool interviews that he does throughout the year. And so I encourage you to go and hear more of his interviews and to learn even more. And certainly it's one of those things that Kevin and I always talk about, when we conclude these events, where we get to hear so many great perspectives. Certainly, AIIM here is a resource for you for, the learning and the research and all that you need, but certainly talk with the service providers, and they are fabulous resources. And as you've, been hearing so many good folks here in what they're sharing, they have a lot of good perspectives to help you find not only the right solution, but the right way to work in your information management and your governance practices to make the most within your organization. And, certainly, take some of the things that we've learned today and take it back to your organization and see what you can do to just start making some more of these changes happen. Again, another shout out, AIM 22, we will be in Denver and from April 27th to 29th, and go to aimconference.com just to learn more. A lot of awesome sessions being lined up. A variety of keynotes are still in the early planning stages. So as more information gets confirmed, our website is constantly being updated. I can't even keep up with it. There's so many cool things being added. And we really hope that you will take the time and the opportunity to come out and just to engage with your peers and just to find more ways to help you get work done. Very much want to thank the underwriters of our event today, ActiveNav, Arctis, Cadence Solutions, and Proventech. And certainly thank you for the contributions from TUMI Transformations and Microsoft. Without the support from our solution providers, AIM wouldn't be able to bring you these free educational programs like these extended webinars, not only the long webinars, but even our 1 hour ones. So thank you very much to our sponsors. And as always, thank you for your participation with us today. And then just those last reminders, please check out the resources. We've been dropping that link in the chat all day. Greatly appreciate if you take the feedback survey. We'll give you the link to the replay by tomorrow so you can catch anything you've missed. But this truly does wrap things up. And Kevin, any last words from you as we before we sign off and thank everyone for their time here?
Well, Teresa, I always find these sessions to be really super educational. And I would just encourage everyone, as you mentioned, to take one thing that you learned today or discovered today and take it back to your place of business and apply it and really bring that value for your time and our time and everyone's time today back to your place of business to make a difference and move the needle, as they say, with records management and digital transformation.
Well, thank you, everybody, for your time. I do value how much time you've given to us today. For Kevin Crane, certainly from Peggy Winton that we heard from earlier today, I'm Teresa Resick from AIM, and we look forward to seeing you with our next event. And have a great afternoon.
Bye, everybody.